Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
After the deepening heat, uncharacteristic of May, flooding the streets of the town with a golden, soulful wave of fresh coolness, coming from the dark gray stone of the Catholic Church, the first of which, as legend had it, was laid by the same architect who had once built Notre Dame de Paris. Stephen was literally dizzy and lingered in the aisle, almost tripped, grasped the back of the pew with his hand, and took a deep breath. "Young man, are you feeling ill?" A certain old woman, Mrs. Justin, ducked out from behind him, looking empathetic and sympathetic. "No, thank you. I'm fine." Stephen forced a smile and stepped back, half a step to let the old lady pass. Mrs. Justine, thanking, levied the case forward, her head in a bonnet. Goose powder and silk ribbon roses bobbed, like a flag sailing a royal frigate. And at last it fell silent as Mrs. Justin sank into a pew in the front row, a seat she had been accustomed to occupy for more than half a century. Stephen settled down in one of the back rows, wrote and was glad that no one was sitting next to him, because right now he was dying to be alone. But he had come to church because he couldn't do otherwise, because otherwise he just couldn't take it anymore. The priest, Father Stewart, appeared up front, and the sermon began. In general, Stephen could not call himself a deeply religious man. To be more precise, he had forgotten the last time he had been in such a place or turned to the Almighty. But today he was in dire need of consolation and absolution, because suddenly everything in his life, seemingly settled and more or less bearable, had gone wrong, and the nightmares of the past, the ones he had hoped had been buried long ago, had returned. They came again, and it would seem that he woke up, washed his face, brushed it off, and lived the whole day easily and happily. But the bad dreams, reminding him of all he had done, came tenaciously, and after them Stephen walked like a man out of his mind, and everything fell out of his hands, and in his head replayed those episodes of reality which he longed to forget. Stephen covered his eyes and, folding his hands, tried to listen to what the Holy Father was saying. Not just to listen, but to hear, letting the meaning of each word pass through him. And he was ready to beg anyone, and at any price, if only relief would come, if only they would help him. Stephen did not remember his childhood in Russia. His mother had taken his 3-year-old baby boy and, ignoring the exhortations of relatives, had followed her husband to Ireland. Stephen's father belonged to the Russian community, which seems to have been formed on the Emerald Isle in the 20s of the last century. And then one day, coming as a tourist to his distant ancestors' hometown, he met Adriana. Then he went to Dublin to work, and after a while she announced that she was pregnant. The man was in shock, but did not refuse the family circumstances and began, first, to send money regularly, and secondly, to prepare the papers for the move. And the first memory that was printed in little Stephen's mind was the call home. He cradled the cat so that it blushed the telephone receiver and clapped. "Grandma, I love you. But that's it, that's enough." Mother snatched the receiver from Stephen's hands and, throwing a few angry words into it, hung it up. Somewhere it was like being glued. Next to that memory was another, Stephen playing with a white teddy bear and a fire engine, and then leafing through a book of fairy tales with wonderful and three-dimensional pictures of Ivan the Tsarevich riding a gray wolf through dark forests. All these were gifts to her grandmother from Russia. She never forgot her daughter or her grandson. "I hate you," shouted Stephen in the face of his mother when she announced that she did not. They will not fly to the funeral of grandmother because there is no money. And right on the same day, by the way, Adriana lost all the monthly allowance she received as an unemployed person at the races, and with the second allowance, which was for the child, she bought booze. Bottles clattered on the table, mixed with cans with hidden iron edges and stubble. Canned goods, some of which already smelled bad. Male and husky memorized voices sounded in the room. Mother had visitors again. "We should teach him a lesson." One of the men ventured and tried to grab the 10-year-old by the scruff of the neck. But Stephen dodged and rushed away from the room and the apartment in general with a nose full of tears. And then, sitting on the steps of their brick house, showed himself heartily. He already understood well what death was, and understood even better that now the last and generally the only person dear to him had disappeared. As for his father, he had passed away 4 years after they had moved to Ireland. But Adriana clung to the possibility of living abroad tightly and completely dismissed the possibility of returning home. True, she did not have a good knowledge of the language of indecent profession, but it was possible to receive all sorts of benefits, and the Russian community helped a little. Earlier, the move helped Stephen to adapt rather quickly, learn the language and generally get into the environment. But at the same time, he also adored his native language and was often sad about the fact that fate had ordered his person in such a way. He often thought that if only his mother had not left, things would have been different. Maybe he wouldn't have slept. Would the family have held him back? By the time Stephen turned 16, his mother had gone completely downhill. The boy tried to spend a minimum of time at home, and the place where they lived. Now, it was hard to call home, because after the death of her husband, Adriana sold his small but decent apartment. And with the proceeds of the money, Rats lived in an apartment the size of a room that her mother had bought with the leftovers. And through the paint, you could see the wallpaper that the previous tenants had put up. It must have been in the 30s. "You've ruined my whole life," Stephen had said more than once. But his mother only grinned at him and threatened him with her finger. "Look, I was spinning. And I live abroad. My girlfriends must have been jealous of how they were in our province. I live abroad with my son." That's what my mother used to say. I entered the surrounding space with my hand with such a proud look, as if it was the palace of the Queen of England. At school, Stephen was one of the laggards. He also got mixed up with bad company. But in those years of his youth, these guys seemed cool to him. Outcasts of the common man's society, these obscure rebels. They hung around all day drawing on the walls, composing music or poetry. Stephen realized too late that the police knew his group by name for a reason. This group of honeyed youths from the suburbs were into petty theft. They also stole cars and acted as couriers to deliver things. "Brother, help me out." One night, when the streets are foggy, Stephen asked Jamie for help. The guy from this company can't get busy himself. His girls promised a date, you know. Hand it over. And Jamie handed his comrade a small package. "I can still pay," Jamie added, with a pleading tone in his voice, seeing the man's hesitation. "Don't be so forward. There's plenty of money here. Where should I carry it?" Stephen asked. And Jane was terribly relieved, instructed him. But something went wrong. That night, Stephen was apprehended by the police. I mean apprehended. After a heart-pounding, fox-like chase. But Stephen wasn't running from them. He didn't know exactly what he was running from, but he was very scared. As for the arrest, the thing was that a policeman identified Stephen as the man who had removed the car stereo the day before. The teenager was taken to the station, and there, by chance, on the same day, several other gang members were arrested, and those whom he considered his friends willingly told about everything Stephen had done with them. Because in this way, they could at least make amends for their own guilt, showing, so to speak, conscientiousness and willingness to cooperate. And from those conversations, Stephen learned that Jamie had died, hit by a car. Stephen thought it would be all right. He waited for his mother to come and bail him out. She was promised she'd be notified, but no one showed up. And the kid, before he even realized what was happening, he ended up behind bars, in a special facility for juvenile delinquents, and the days flew by. Stephen was shocked, terrified. But, as is typical of human nature, over time, he became accustomed to the circumstances, not just resigning himself to it, getting used to it. And when he was released the day after his 18th birthday, he was confused. What to do now? His mother visited him in prison only once, but not to encourage him, to comfort him. She was interested in one thing, whether Stephen had any stash of something left. And then she said he was an idiot because normal sons take care of their mothers. They're behind bars. She left. And after almost 2 years, Stephen had to go back to their apartment. There was nowhere else to go. So he did. His mother was found on the floor, fallen out of her wheelchair. During this time, she had managed to poison herself with logs, whiskey, broken legs, and was not treated. But despite everything she had been through, she continued to drink. "Sonny's back," Adriana whispered through what was left of her teeth and reached for the bottle. Actually, because she couldn't reach it. That's why she fell over. "Help," she called, looking at the bottle. Mother lifted his mother up, and he almost threw up. He'd met homeless people on the streets, of course. This was how they would live with a cold. The windows closed, the air alcoholic and stinky. There's a mountain of garbage on the floor, leftovers rotting on the table, furniture, appliances, everything that used to be of any value has been sold off. "What is this?" Stephen asked, taking a paper from the table. It was some kind of document, and his heart. A bad feeling. And that's the mother behind him gurgling to suck the leftovers out of the bottle. "A bargain," she laughed. "And I thought nobody wanted our villain." "What are you talking about?" Stephen frowned. This little apartment was certainly not the best real estate in Dublin. It was on the outskirts, in a house that needed renovation. But what Stephen heard next shocked him. It turned out that Adriana had sold some people their only home, sold it supposedly for cash. What had it gone for? Stephen knew exactly. And also for exchanging that apartment for some country house, a cottage in the suburbs. The kid exclaimed, "Mom, are you out of your mind? You can't get that much for our apartment." Well. He nervously leafed through the pages of the confusing contract. In general, Stephen was not a real estate expert, but he realized when he saw the numbers. His mother had sold the apartment for 1/10 of its real value. There was also the address of the new property that these realtors had bought for her. "It's time to move out," he mumbled, "but his mother is in a hurry. They say if I don't eat, the police will come." Stephen was breathing heavily, choking on anger, resentment. He realized his mother had been a victim of fraud, but there was probably nothing he could do about it. "Where are you going?" "Get some groceries. I'm starving." "Drunk," his mother shouted after him as Stephen jumped out of the apartment. The rest of the day the guy spent trying to understand the situation at the place specified in the contract, as the address of the office was a small office, where he was told that everything is normal. The deal is fair. And anyway, what claim does the young gentleman have if he had no rights to that housing? When Stephen went to the police, they listened to him carefully and said that they could not help because the deal was legal. "So you can, of course, go to a lawyer," the elderly officer advised. "But take into account the case risks dragging on for years. In addition, it will cost about several tens of 1,000 euros. By evening, it was drizzling rain. Stephen returned home. He realized it was the end, but he was also brutally determined. "Pack up," he told his mother. "I'll take you home." The thing was that on the way back, Stephen had time to find out what was at the address given in the contract. So he made a decision. He helped his mother gather the few things that were left in her pockets. It was empty, which meant there was no money for a cab. They took the bus first. Passengers interceded, fussed. Stephen could understand them. His mother didn't seem to have washed him for a long time. "Hey, let me help you," said a stout-looking man. "Looks like a laborer," and he helped him lower Adriana out of the bus. Stephen thanked him. They walked the rest of the way. Or rather, he walked to break the cauldron ahead. Here, the poor neighborhoods ended and the industrial zone began. And then they were at the city dump. The authorities had long promised to make the place look decent, but they had never gotten around to it. That's why there are a few barracks, built in the 40s for refugees from the continent. 2 of the 3 barracks were completely abandoned, with boarded-up windows and doors. One of them was still alive, where the homeless lived, and there, according to the contract, was Adriana's new accommodation, a room on the first floor with a broken window and a failed floor. There was nothing here but technically the barracks was still listed on the documents as real estate. "Here we are," Stephen said. He allowed himself a wicked smile as Adriana began to realize how she'd been duped. "Son." The older woman's lips trembled. "How am I here? Don't leave me, son." She reached up to him, her hands all delicately veined, arthritis-excluded fingers. "Did you choose this life for yourself?" Stephen's back was turned. "You're not my mother anymore, and I don't care if you die here. You drunk, you creep," he shouted, with a shower of tears, and then, turning around, threw himself away. He didn't care. He did it. Nearly 10 years have passed since that day. Stephen hadn't lived in Dublin for a long time. He had left it, having once bought a bus ticket to the west coast of the island with the money he earned. A lot has happened since then. Stephen worked on fishing boats, worked on a farm growing potatoes and cabbages. He's been a builder, a driver. Basically, he did the best he could. He didn't aspire to anything. He understood that a man, especially if he has nothing behind him, has no family support or financial base, for example, in the form of an inheritance, that such a person should try twice as hard to stand firmly on his feet and not let his life go down the drain. But the years flew by, and Stephen still lived as if today. And so fate brought him to this small resort town. Stephen was not a great fan of classical English and Irish literature, but it seemed to him that it was from such towns that Dickens, Austen, and others had written off the characters for their novels. Time seemed to stand still here, the abundance of greenery, the unhurried rhythm of life. Stephen worked on a construction site, or rather, was among the workers who built the house and had to perform finishing work. Although, in Stephen's opinion, taking into account the size and layout of the house, it turned out to be a whole mansion. Working here was interesting from a professional point of view, as well as profitable. Oh, that. And then clapped Stephen on the shoulder. Suddenly he jumped up, turned around and looked at another worker. "I didn't know you were a believer," Matt remarked. "I just came in for a moment." Stephen smiled guiltily. "I just wanted to, of course." He couldn't say that he had a guilty conscience and felt that he couldn't live another day without taking away his sins. More specifically, his major sin of the past. "I understand," Matt nodded. "Mine are sick. Corey, can you believe it? I thought they were vaccinated." The mayor complained about his family's difficulties. He and his wife had 5 kids. "Mary says it's our punishment for missing Sunday Mass. What can we do? We've got a vegetable garden to plant." "You're the one who's been complaining about Matt's life." "I was the one who talked him into it. I said, let's not go all the way to town. Let's just do things in the garden." So she agreed. Especially since my average Johnny, he stole watercolor paints and decided to paint his sister's dresses. Can you believe it? Matt choked on the bag, and Mary was washing, ironing, laying out for the girls so the dolls would show up for Mass. "So, anyway, I sinned and my Mary cursed," Matt sighs. "I got it too," says Johnny. "All over me." "So that's how we didn't go." "So why aren't you in your parish?" Stephen asked, just to be polite and keep the conversation going, because his thoughts were far away from the story of his acquaintance's life. "Well, is it not a good deed?" He came in. "Can I ask where you live?" He doesn't ask, Matt shrugged. "It's just that I'm in town all day today. I have to go to the drugstore, then to the supermarket, to the suburbs. I'll be back tonight. I already went to church. That means I did the right thing." "Do you think it'll help my family?" Matt finished, pathetically. "It will," Stephen replied, thinking that it probably wouldn't help him. Or maybe it wouldn't help at all. Some auntie from the front pew spoke up for them, and, turning around, flashed her eyes. "This isn't your priest. Are you here for the temple?" "I'm sorry." Matt was making an appearance. He was a master at it. "We won't do it again." Stephen breathed a sigh of relief. He, too, would like silence now. That's what he'd come here for. Silence. The priest's voice, his wisdom and prohibition. Stephen was determined to confess that sin today and timidly hoped that maybe he wasn't a particularly religious man, but maybe he wouldn't be denied. Maybe all was not yet lost. Finally, the sermon began. The Holy Father started talking about how harmful it was to spend money carelessly and how it could ruin a person in general. Stephen sighed again with relief. He had feared it would be about something family-related, like how it was wrong to abandon his elderly, sick parents. Stephen had lost track of time. He felt like he'd been here forever. He even started to get annoyed that it was taking so long. He immediately gave himself an imaginary slap for such inappropriate thoughts. But at last the sermon was over, and Stephen began to make his way through the congregation. Everyone was saying a different word to the Holy Father. "Do I need to confess?" hotly blurted out Stephen. The imp. "Hello." "Yes, of course." Stuart raised an eyebrow in surprise, but on the whole was not fazed by the assertion. "If you be so kind as to wait for one more person." "Okay." Stephen wiped his palms on his pants and sat down in the pew to wait. The church was almost empty. Stephen glanced nervously at the confessionals, wondering if it would be soon. And when the door opened, he jumped up and was about to enter. But a few moments were enough to recognize the man who had come out of the confessional, and for many years Stephen had not thought of him. His brain had discarded his image as unnecessary garbage for lack of use. Now, however, cold as a stormy sea, green eyes, short blonde hair so white it looked gray. But the man was not an old man. He was no more than 30 now. And then, on the night of the crippled man's arrest, barely 20 came out, cast around. A distracted glance passed Stephen, almost hitting him with his shoulder. Not in his eyes, not in his facial expression, not a shadow of recognition. Stephen, on the other hand, recognized it and knew for sure. There was no mistaking it was him. But how? Why? Now that night was printed in memory as an image on the first photographs of the 19th century with time faded, but you can see the important details. And yet it all seems so unreal. "Sir," the priest's concerned voice brought him out of his stupor. "Stephen shook you badly. You turned pale," added Stuart sympathetically. "Ah, no. Thank you. I'm fine," Stephen muttered. "You seem to want to confess," with a soft, friendly smile. The priest made an inviting gesture with his hand. I, Stephen, did not stop feeling like a great sinner in the blink of an eye. But just now any mood for what I had planned was fading away. "Excuse me, I'll come back later," he muttered, and hurried away from the church to Sun Street, to the air. He urgently needed to get out of the room and into the open. Stephen wandered down the quiet street, where every house was decorated from the front with boxes of flowers and climbing plants, and under the blind of the still sun he sank further and further into the events of that night. He just had to hand over the package. James had given the address and the exact location. He added that the man would come to pick up the package and pay what was due. In the meantime, he gave him an advance. And everything seemed simple. The only unusual thing was that for this Stephen had to turn to an expensive neighborhood of Dublin, where he had never been before. It all seemed an adventure to the young cripple. Jamie said that he was well paid for delivering the shipment, but since he was out of business himself, the money was due to the new courier. That afternoon, Stephen had just had another argument with his mother. She'd blown off what was due on the utility bill, and to relax a little and cheer up, because the matter was murky, he'd stopped at a bar on the way. Stephen saw no contradiction in that. He hated his mother, but he thought he was in control. The only way he could get rid of the alcohol, by the way, was to go to jail, where it wasn't, of course. And in the bar, Stephen ordered the most expensive and strongest drink. He told the bartender, "How old are you, son?" He frowned. "I'm not your son," Stephen muttered and slid a €50 bill. That's the way to go, including bribes. The barman took the money and poured. Then another and another. And when he got to the specified address, Stephen barely kept on his feet. He was confused and almost turned inside out when he realized that in front of him was a cemetery, or rather, the part of it that was melancholically desolate. The sun, meanwhile, had been completely replaced by the moon. The full, milky pale high fence was killed by ivy. And Stephen frowned. There must be a proper entrance here. What would he say, the caretaker? Nothing. It's not a museum. And they don't charge admission. I don't care. Stephen grinned to himself. Maybe he has a grandmother baroness buried here. But it was too lazy to look for the gate. But there was a hole in the fence. In one place, the bars must have fallen out from rust. Stephen was a teenager then, so it was easy to fit through the hole. He looked at his watch. It was still an hour before the appointed time. Well, that's just it, he decided. I'll wait. A cool breeze and a special atmosphere. All these crypts, the statues of angels who seemed to be watching him, all this would sober Stephen up. He was tense and confused, because it suddenly became so nauseating to wait there, in the agreed place, under a huge oak tree, and because there too stood the statue of an angel. He was dropping tears and reaching out his stone hands to someone. Stephen would not let go. The stupid thought that if he turned away for a moment, the statue might come to life, throw itself at him, because he wasn't a very nice person, was he? Vaughn noted another drinking buddy of his mother the other day and whistled after the girls in short skirts, and he disturbed the eternal peace of ladies and gentlemen. So Stephen wandered away, decided that he would walk a little way and come back. He had sobered up, and now he was gnawing with curiosity. What was he handing over for a few 1,000 euros? Certainly not a love note. His fingers took the roll out of his pocket and unwrapped it. Under the dirty cloth was a scrap of newspaper, in which was wrapped a wooden polyhedron covered with strange golden squiggles. It looked like a puzzle. The miniature box with the secret. Stephen began to twirl something in his fingers. What was it? His fiddling with the strange object was interrupted by a strange sound. In fact, it had been heard for about 5 minutes. But at first Stephen had thought it was a night bird. But now it must be because he had gone further into the cemetery. He realized it wasn't a bird or the wind. It was a voice. It sounded like a man reciting poetry. Only it sounded animalistic. It was like a chaotic jumble of separate words, and yet Stephen could swear to it. There was a certain order to it. It was like a song or a spell of dark magic. I'm surprised at the nonsense that comes to mind. The courier began to hastily pack the wooden something back, but somehow he accidentally pressed on the wooden edges, and they opened with a quiet click, revealing a black gut, and in it shone a diamond. Stephen had never seen a real diamond in his life, but he guessed it at once. And although he had never suspected in himself such a craving for beauty, he found himself infected by the pure radiance, like the light of stars in the game of multicolored sparks. The stone was large, even by the standards of gems, huge, and it was scary to imagine how much it was worth. Stephen realized he was holding his breath only when his chest ached and his eyes darkened. The smell of bodies, bread and nervous air. And he started to close the secret box. There was no need to guess. Decent people don't pass gems with boys from the poorer parts of Dublin. So the stones are stolen. Stephen, of course, had been in many stories in his life, but he had never been involved in outright criminality. The strange noises subsided, and at the same time he realized he was no longer alone in the cemetery. He was just lucky he was standing behind another statue, not of an angel, but of a huge dog. Apparently, some rich aristocrat had decided to bury his favorite dog here with honors. Kostya sat down, because a figure separated from the nearest crypt under the creak of closing doors and floated along the path. He could not see the face or the body. Everything was hidden. A floor-length and dark cloak in a hand, draped in a dark glove, swayed an antique-looking oil lamp. Stephen crouched down, clutching at the cold stone in his gut that on no account should he be seen. And when he peered out cautiously, the figure was already melting into the distance. Stephen wiped his forehead, cold sweat coming out. He felt like a character in a Hollywood thriller. "What kind of day is yours?" the guy noted. "Ours." There were almost 40 minutes left till the meeting with the mysterious recipient of the cargo. "We have to wait." But Olga was now gnawing with curiosity. And what was that strange person doing in the crypt? There was definitely a mystery here, and Stephen wanted to solve it. That's why he went to the crypt. "I'll just take one look," the boy promised himself. The heavy door was ajar. Turning on the flashlight on his phone, Stephen dedicated the top. O'Neill read the letters embossed above the crypt entrance, and he realized it was the last name of the family members lying here. Thoughts popped into his head about how there must be a lot of germs in here. Stephen's first teacher, Miss Charlotte Lewis, hated two things: dirty and lack of discipline. The latter was dealt with by the use of a pointer, under which the offenders had to put their palms under. Stephen learned about the fact that children should not be beaten, by the way, only at the age of 13, when the school scandal broke out because of Mrs. Lewis. And for the first, this teacher had hundreds of stories in the style of that one boy ate unwashed apricots and died, and another stroked a stray dog and went blind. "It's a good thing you're not around." Ms. Lewis grinned. To encourage herself, Stephen and stepped into the crypt. Silence. Emptiness. Except for the burials. Well, what else did you expect, you idiot? He was about to leave when he realized there was another door in the back of the building. There must be mice or rats in there. Please let it be rats, Stephen pleaded to himself, because something was making noises. A couple of steps, peering in, devoted to the phones. Sarcophagus on a pedestal, white marble. The lid was made by a skilled craftsman. It depicts a sleeping warrior with sword in hand. "Is anyone alive?" Stephen asked. I wondered why his voice had dropped. "Fear, I suppose." "Oh, that's creepy." But he immediately breathed a sigh of relief. No one answered. So the strange sound must have been imagined. Boom. Luckily, it didn't hit inside the crypt, but outside. A sudden thunderstorm had begun. Stephen jumped up, dropped the phone, which bounced off the corner of the sarcophagus and fell behind it. It was brand new. I'd been saving up for it for 6 months. Where could I get a new one? However, if someone reminded himself Stephen did not behave like an idiot and quietly waited for the client, it was possible to buy a new smartphone with payment. Now it would be impossible to miss the customer at all. What time is it? Does not enter the crypt of poisonous vipers. Thoughts were racing, and not at once Stephen made out what was going on above him. Now there were sounds coming from the crypt itself and from the sarcophagus. It seemed as if someone was lurking there. The scraping was accompanied by a groaning that made the blood freeze in the veins. Earlier, when Stephen sometimes watched horror movies, he used to marvel at how stupidly their characters behaved. But he himself was no better. Instead of picking up the phone and running away, he spread out and stared at the sarcophagus. It appeared as if its lid had shifted. No, it had been lying ever so slightly crooked all along. On an impulse, Stephen began to move it to the side. Then he shone the light directly into the sarcophagus, and what he saw he could not forget. Actually, it was because of what he saw that Stephen went on a panic run, in which he dropped the diamond, dropped the box, and then, in shock, flew out into the streets of the suburbs and ran into a police patrol. He burst into tears like a little boy. And when the officer recognized him as a thief, he did not resist and only nodded in response to the words that "You will go, boy, with us to the station. And there is safe." "And from nerves?" Stephen asked. The two patrolmen looked at each other. "Yes, where else but there?" The younger one answered. "You all right? Are you feeling okay?" "No," answered Stephen. "I don't know. Please save me." The teenager turned up his nose. The flashlight beam, faint but piercing, bright for this time of day, revealed a scene in which nightmare was strangely combined with Gothic aesthetics. True, Stephen hadn't thought about it at the time. His brain just absorbed what he saw and signaled it. "We're in trouble. Let's run and see if it catches up with us." There was something lying among the sweet-scented snow-white lilies. Stephen at first thought it was a sculpture. He saw the tall features of a face made of marble, and part of the face was hidden. On the head of the one lying there was a helmet gilded, or perhaps gold. His attention, however, focused on something else, A few seconds passed, and it came to Stephen's attention. No, it was not a statue, but a man. Another wave of cold fake sweat. It trickled from between his shoulder blades. Had the bartender stirred in the last cocktail? Stephen pressed his palm to his stomach. The syrup was sweet. Cream, tomato juice. But the whiskey made a nasty mess too. Alcohol's evil. Consciousness prompted again. Maybe he'd passed out and was sleeping under a bush. Or maybe it is white fever begins. What are its symptoms? And then Stephen decided to check it out. That's a real person lying there. It's just the way he looked. I mean, it was like he was too perfect. Poor thing, Stephen thought. Must have died young. It's not the money that makes you happy, so it's better to be poor but alive. He reached for the body where the hands with gold rings were folded on the chest. The fingers clutched the hilt of an ancient sword. A strange sight for sure. It seems that in the olden days, warriors were placed in mounds with all sorts of bling. But it's fresh. Stephen took a noisy gulp of air, and his stomach seemed to settle down. The palm of the boy's hand went down to the chest of the one who lay in the sarcophagus. It was cold. Or was it the clothes? A strange leather jacket like the ones they wore in the olden days was freezing. It's a cold night. Wait, why is a modern man dressed like that? That's for sure. The rich have their quirks. Stephen, it's silly to giggle, because his buddies will be shocked when he tells them. It's not like drawing pictures on the wall of City Hall. Who's gonna believe him, though? I'll take one ring. What does he care? Stephen muttered and grabbed the man's hand. And the next moment, Stephen suddenly met his gaze with green eyes. His heart sank, his body stiffened as much as the one lying there. And then the one lying down smiled, contrite, and sat up abruptly. Stephen's wrist was in the grip of icy fingers. Green eyes turned, and from the mouth came the hiss, or rather the warning roar of a beast ready to attack. In the next instant, Stephen wailed from staggered. He lashed out, and turned and flung himself away. Rather, the bushes whipped. Spit in the face. He twisted his leg. I don't care. Just to get away. It's spurring me on. Intoxication. Stephen just flew forward. He didn't stop, even though his lungs were burning with fire. Doing what? What's following his trail? He's from a sarcophagus that flies. Maybe he's already grown wings and will crash down from above. Stephen sobs, so he sped up. And then there was the street, the police patrol, and the arrest. Apparently, he looked really bad, because at the station, before locking him behind bars, in his cell, the policeman who had inquired about his well-being gave him coffee and fed him donuts. Stephen swallowed it all and went into withdrawal. He confessed to stealing the tape recorder, and then didn't really give much credit for other things. Hooliganism, insulting authority figures, shoplifting, usually chocolate bars and potato chips. But he flatly refused to talk about why he'd been scared and what he'd asked to be rescued from. But because he didn't want to be sent to a mental institution. And then he'd probably have to tell about the diamond too. And that Stephen was a freak. It's a real mess. How many years has it been since then? And then in broad daylight, miles away from Dublin, and in a church in a place like this, he met this man. Same eyes, same nose shape. 10 years on, but Stephen would have sworn it was him. It only created more confusion in his mind, though. No, as time went on, the guy stopped thinking he'd stumbled upon a real vampire or some other ghost. That's bullshit. There's no such thing. There's got to be a rational explanation for everything. And then, over the years, this episode went, as they say, to the farthest shelf in the vault of memory. But still, now the memory is refreshed, as if it happened yesterday. And I should be glad. It turns out there was definitely a man in the crypt, but something was bothering me. It was as if seeing him was an omen. Stephen didn't realize how he'd gotten home. It's called a footstep. Before everything went wrong, he'd thought he'd be able to relax a little on his legal day off. After he gets some help at church. That's how it works, right? After that, He wouldn't go to the pub for a drink. He's been out of that for a while, ever since that day. But the pub was the best place to get the best. Chicken fried wings, perhaps. Stephen was going to have a bite of that. But now, of course, he didn't go. He lay on the bed, not developing. Stupidly did not care about the cleanliness of the house, was just lazy. But by evening and the stomach demanding sounded, and had to go to the kitchen, where he ate what piled up in the freezer instant macaroni and cheese for the microwave, and then already separated in wall in his outer clothes with pants to sleep. And what luck that there were no dreams tonight. "What are you like?" Matt asked the next day. "You'd think you were dancing with the elves all night, not sleeping, wouldn't you?" The friend grinned. Matt, like many locals, was quite serious about the little people, with whom, according to Irish mythology, both elves and creatures, medium between trolls and dwarves, were related. Or maybe Matt was playing with his eyebrows. "You didn't get enough sleep, pretty girl." Stephen let the horseshoe pass not only in his ears, but also in the ears of the other bachelors at the firm. There was a perception that Matt had been pregnant again since finding personal marital bliss with the graying of his Mary's benches. "We've been doing it ever since and trying to set others on the same path. It's just been that kind of day. Listen, let's get down to business, or we won't be able to do it until New Year's Eve," Stephen replied. But it must have sounded a little rude, because Matt chirped and, grabbing the creamery materials, moved to the other end of the room. The sun was hiding behind the clouds on the seaside today, and the wind was coming in gusts. All in all, the weather was just right for hard work. "Excuse me," a ringing maiden's voice brought Stephen out of his musings. In spite of the further heavy thinking, he was distracted by the yesterday's meeting, and even smiled involuntarily. "I ordered a pizza for lunch," Tessa said, fixing her red curls that had been knocked out of her neck by the wind. "And they told me they were having a promotion and two at the same time. So maybe you boys would like some pizza too." "Pizza's a good thing." Murdoch's all fired up. Oldest guy on the team. A jack of all trades, he said he'd work for another year and retire to live on the beach with his wife, devoting himself to fishing. T. O'Neill, 26, single, not in a committed relationship, orphan, but has an older brother with whom they live together. She is an interior designer by profession and calls this house her best and most important project. Loves Italian cuisine, loves to dance. Dreams of having a street Bernard. Can't stand dirty jokes. All this information Stephen didn't collect, but it was dumped on him by Matt. And Stephen had a suspicion that someone was trying to take on the role of matchmaker. Except it was no use. No, in theory, he recognized that Tessa O'Neill was a very attractive girl. They say she has natural beauty and a striking liveliness of disposition. She had waist-length red hair and freckles to match. Now in spring on the face brightness, as if opened on the forest edge, the first flowers. Tall height and slender figure with feminine forms. TLC is most often seen in dresses, flying skirts. She is so romantic. It was also known that Tessa's parents left her and her brother a decent inheritance, but she is not Matt at resorts and parties, and learned and works hard. Also supports the local animal shelter for homeless animals. Good girl. Never thought about hopping in a cab though. What the hell? They belong to different worlds, don't they? He's a loser, a 30-year-old man without a corner of his own, and with such moral baggage that if he'd lived like this 300 years ago, he would have been banished from the city gates. In general, Stephen kept his distance. Even in his mind, almost always succeeded. However, that didn't stop him from admiring, of course. Ms. O'Neill in theory. The break with pizza had a beneficial effect, and after it the work boiled over with redoubled vigor. God willing, we'll be done by next weekend, Murdoch said, arching his back. Stephen nodded. The work was really coming to an end. It was time to wallpaper and install the outlets, and then they could turn in the project and get an estimate. And Mrs. O'Neill would no longer loom before his eyes. An unhappy thought came to his brain. Stephen mentally slapped himself on the back. You're thinking about the wrong thing. It's time to settle down. Somewhere he was tired of wandering around Ireland and living in the present day. Wanted stability, wanted to put down roots. Maybe it would keep him from the pain of the past. At last it was quite evening. The workers were leaving, but Stephen was still lingering. He stood on the veranda and the second floor of the house, from which he had an impressive view of the coast. Light-colored sand, tall grasses. The wind almost always blew here, and it must be fresh here, even on the hottest day. Stephen ran his palm over the smooth, dark wood. The top of the veranda fence was made of it, and the wall of the house on this side, where the spacious living room was. There were 3 of them in the house, and they were all glass. Suddenly, an image flashed in my mind of a weekend table for the whole family in this living room. A young woman like Tessa. Of course, one day she'll have beautiful children. And her husband. He's got to be a real man. He's got to be a real man. He's got to carry her around and never hurt her. He certainly shouldn't be like me. Stephen grinned bitterly, thinking that he himself had as much chance of having a normal family as of going to the moon. Because somehow, since his youth, life had gone wrong. And what good can come from that? Today's a good day, isn't it? TPP appeared on the veranda so suddenly that Stephen flinched. She stopped a step away from him, resting her hands on the railing. The wind flew in powerful gusts and ruffled her long new skirt. A snow-white tank top was tucked beneath a cashmere cardigan, and Stephen hastily averted his gaze from the seductive forms. Got himself a freak, thought he, angrily. A girl like that would never look at someone like you. Tessa started a conversation about what remained to be done in the house, and Stephen agreed that yes, it was probably not too late to make changes to the skirting boards. But of course, that would have to be reflected in the estimate and so on. "But I think I'll go," he said, glancing at his watch, as if he had somewhere to go. But he just realized he had to go. "Oh, I've totally lost you guys." Tessa laughed and deftly twisted her hair into a tangle. She intercepted the silk elastic band with pearls that had been dangling from her wrist as a bracelet. The wind picked up even more. And now even the seagulls flying over the coast were noticeably flapping in its gusts. "No, it's all right." Stephen smiled embarrassedly. "It's just that you probably have a lot of plans for the evening. We're all about business." "Well, I'm not really doing anything tonight," Tessa shrugged. "My brother will be busy with our shields, and I'll probably just watch a comedy movie," suggested Stephen. "No," shook her head at Tessa, and the pearl earrings on the long chain swayed in time with her movement. "Melodrama. I want something about love." "I see," Stephen mumbled, and for some reason got busy with the coloring. Then he decided it was time to leave. He went down to the first floor, and already at the front door, he realized that something was missing. Of course. And the toolbox is an idiot. A brand new set that had cost him almost 400 euros. Could have cost less, but it was a good set, and with a lot of useful things for a builder of repairmen who wants to work in tone with modern technology. Could have picked it up tomorrow, of course. It wouldn't have gone anywhere overnight from the house. But Stephen had a thing for keeping all his stuff with him and in neat order. So he made his way to the room where they worked. Tessa seemed to be planning to set up a guest room here tonight. Stephen, if it were his house, would have used it for a home library or nursery, because the windows looked out onto the garden. On the first floor of the house, the lights were off everywhere except the hallway. But basically the night was cloudless, and the moon was full, so there was visibility. As Stephen entered the room, he bumped into someone. And it wasn't Tessa, and the moon was just across the window, so he could see who was in front of him. And it was the one with the wine eyes, and the type. Stephen froze. The guy froze, too, and the eyes in his face became like black holes. It seemed that he was about to grin his face and let out a trumpeting animal roar. But instead, the one who stood opposite only exhaled in astonishment. "You are not Yura," answered the seated voice Stephen, and paid the price. On the plus side, the fact that he had met his past at all was a plus. Now it was clear that in front of him was a living person, which meant that he then did not catch a hallucination of a rebellious ancient knight. But the minus also outweighed it. This person also remembered everything, and was just furious and stepped on with a very bad look. I wonder, thought the heavies. Stephen, why is he angry? That you disturbed his peace. What the hell was going on in there? Where's the stone? A stranger from the past grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, pulling him closer. Where's my diamond? And the precious gem? Stephen, of course, remembered after the arrest, and more than once, but thought that since it was not possible to pass on, it would be better for him to keep quiet, so as not to get even more trouble. So it's yours. What is it? I don't know. I lost it. The green eyes didn't believe him. Where's the diamond? Tell me. Or what? Stephen felt an inappropriate sense of humor. I don't see a sword on you. The next moment he saw it thrown before his eyes by some dexterous trick at the door leading to the lower terrace. The blow knocked out his breath. In this part of the house it was necessary to remove the finished floor at the last moment in order to get to the wrongly laid communications. What was the other firm doing anyway? And Stephen was unlucky. Collapsed right into the hole. But lucky too, because his back hit the smooth, not the pipes. He didn't move much. No, I don't think his spine's broken. You know, it's just luck. Green eyes, and who's clearly used to solving problems with his fists, also ended up in a hole. And he's hovering over Stephen again. We were wondering what idiot the courier handed the shipment to. Couldn't find it. And then the dumbass died. Jamie's mind was moving the gloomy little man. I guess did you kill him? Green Eye's eyebrows crept upward in surprise. Why? No, he was an asshole, crossing the road where he shouldn't. He didn't have time to tell me exactly who he gave the stone to. But now I remember the face. There was no one else at the cemetery that night. So where is it? I don't know. Stephen's in my clutches and grip. I never thought of myself as a weakling, but there was nothing I could do against this type, and he suppressed not only physically, but as if he radiated energy of danger, cruelty. That's how the rival stretched out, and suddenly smiled, as if he remembered something. He looked around at the whole construction pit. And you know in the olden days that the house stood centuries, and for good luck the foundation was taken. Zamulia sacrifice. When the rooster animal what? But human sacrifice is best. So maybe since you're so useless, you've forgotten everything. So unlucky. It's worth leaving you here, you psycho, whispered Stephen. And then suddenly he learned evil and charged upward with his knee. Gotcha. Green eyes lined up, and with a lingering sideways glance the enemy collapsed. Stephen with the trot of a frog climbed out of the hole. Purely masculine. He understood that mean blow. Really painful beyond belief. What's going on here? There was a worried voice. Tessa had turned on the light in the room and now looked out onto the veranda, frowned when he saw the head of the man in the hole behind Stephen. Kirk, what are you doing there? We need to call the police. Stephen blurted out. That psycho snuck into the house and, that's my brother, exclaimed Tessa and rushed to the hole from which Zeal, obviously still in pain, was climbing out. What the hell is going on here? Stephen stood in shock. This psychopath is Tessa's brother. In general, the girl told herself a lot about him, Tala, about how kind, wonderful he was, how after the death of her parents he took care of her, and for her sake he gave up his career as a detective, took over the family business. Both that man and this one couldn't be the same person. I'm fine, Kirk muttered. And the windpipe is all over the construction dust. Tessa, who is this guy, and how did he end up in our house? Him. The girl looked at them in turn. Stephen the builder, he works here. For a few minutes there was silence around the little company. The only sounds were the sound of the surf in the distance and the singing of a bird in the garden. Yes, Patrice nods flowers. The girl exhaled. The test had taken place. Stale and masking whiskey. How about we drink tea and talk quietly about everything? Judging by Kirk's face, To speak now, he would prefer the last word over his opponent. But Stephen decided that to spite this man, who by his face and first impression would play villains in Hollywood action movies, he would keep peace for Tessa's sake. They went into the kitchen, and this room was the first to be finished and arranged as it should be. That was what the thoughtful Tessa had decided, and so now it was quite cozy. The girl piled tea, took out sandwiches and cakes from the refrigerator, put cookies on the table, and offered to have a snack. But her offer was ignored. Boys are boys, she grinned. Take a seat between her brother and Stephen, who looked at each other without even thinking, drawn to the drinks and food. So, what are you two fighting about? He stole our diamond, Kirk said flatly. No, he didn't. I dropped it or something, shrugged Stephen. Who stole it? What are you talking about? Asked Kirk. Is it fair to pass on jewelry like that with a guy from the suburbs? Like it's something criminal? Stephen made a logical argument. Or am I missing something? You don't have to understand. We should have just handed over our damn diamond. Kirk stepped forward. It seemed that in a moment he would jump up on the table and throw himself at his opponent. Maybe then we should have gone out after him, as we had agreed with the courier. Stephen raised an eyebrow expressively. Not lying in the crypt. What was that all about? What if I had a weak heart? What's this masquerade anyway? Where's the diamond? You expect me to believe anything you say. You know, when I first asked about it, I could tell you knew what I was talking about. So you stuck your nose in what you were asked to tell me. You think it's okay to be curious. And you expect me to believe that when you saw the jewelry, you didn't run away with it. I did. Kirk grinned. How convenient. And there's no proof. You, by the way, tried to take the ring off me in the crypt. I'd been drinking, and I felt awfully awkward. I was drunk. That's great. I think I'm starting to believe that a drunken idiot could actually lose what was entrusted to him. But how do you explain what? All right, stop. You're standing up, spreading your arms like a referee in a boxing ring. It seems we need to clear something up, and for that everyone needs to calm down. I am calm, Kirk muttered, but sat back down and even drank his tea defiantly. Petrus spoke up, addressing Stephen. After their parents died in a car accident, it was just the two of them. She was 15, he was 18. Her father owned a large firm involved in the production and sale of automobile fuel. Kirk had hastily taken over the board of directors, although it had previously been assumed that Tracy would be the one to move into the family business because her brother had chosen a different vocation. But Tessa was still too young, and Kirk decided to postpone the dream. Relatives, of course, existed, but theoretically, because the father of the brother and sister had long ago cut all ties with most of them. The head of the family, Mr. John O'Neill, was also a passionate collector of precious and semi-precious stones. His last acquisition was a diamond from India, a unique stone of pink hue, which had a rich history and was shrouded in legends. It was not easy to get it. There was a fierce battle at the auction, and not only in the bids, there were attempts to bribe its organizers as well. John O'Neill won, but on the way, when the stone was in Istanbul, it was stolen, and it turned out that it was done by an old friend of the men's private club, Mr. Albert Free. Of course, O'Neill's lawyers were ready to take up the case, but John feared that Albert had decided to cover his tracks and hide the diamond somewhere irretrievably. Then he came upon members of a gang in Dublin, among whom were first-class thieves. They took the order and executed it brilliantly. But John did not have time to return his treasure. He and Number Kirk, who knew the whole story, had to eventually take care of the precious piece of his father's collection. The stone was to be delivered by one of the gang members, and it was Jamie. Yeah, well, the guy decided to take the case. I see, said Stephen. Well, he thought it was a criminal case. Turns out it was. Well, it wasn't exactly legal either, but he could understand Kirk. Now there was one more detail. What the hell was Kirk doing in the crypt? I could say it's none of your business, Tessa's brother replied. It's our family's. Kirk, please. Tissa soothingly covered his hand with her fingers. I realize almost no one knew about this, but I think he can be trusted. Kirk reddened his face, threw from Papeliev an extremely suspicious glance at Stephen, but nodded silently and spoke. John O'Neill was not the kind of man who made himself. The family's wealth had been handed down from generation to generation, and almost all the ancestors in the family believed it was for a reason. According to legend, success and prosperity were granted to the first member of the family, Sturhepnu, about 500 years ago, when a brave warrior was lucky enough to capture and take Princess Mary as his wife. And since then, for each man of the O'Neill family, when the time came for him to inherit after the death of the head of the family, it was his turn to undergo a kind of initiation and test at the same time. The essence of it was that a man had to put on a gilded helmet and take a sword, and also put on rings. Both, as the legend said, belonged to the same tribe. The heir also had to put on a shroud and spend the night in the crypt. And not just any night. He had to spend it in an empty sarcophagus that was meant for him in the future. Yes, that was the tradition. When a boy was born, a sarcophagus was ordered for his future, the same size as a grown man. By the way, it was believed that it would deceive the evil forces, and in infancy, childhood, the heir would not die. Kirk grimly explained an important detail of the sinister ritual. But it is necessary not just to lie down, but to sleep. That's why they also drink a decoction of herbs. Is it a sedative? And a sedative? He grinned. You know, it's a very stressful environment. Stephen listened to this almost with a high jaw. So much for aristocratic family traditions. Creepy, isn't it? I must have had too little to drink. Kirk shrugged. I had nightmares, and I tried to wake up, but I couldn't. But then when you touched me, I woke up. Scared you? Scared myself, he answered for the first time, without malice, with a chuckle. I didn't realize who you were at first. I thought maybe Tomb Raiders. Who was that figure? I saw a man in a cloak come out of the crypt, Stephen said. That's why I thought I'd come in. It was me, Tessa sighed. You were a bit of a shock, Stephen, for a 15-year-old girl to be involved in something like that. What was I supposed to do? I shrugged. We had to honor tradition, but you were alone. I'm sorry, but who would blame you if you didn't do it? No one. Tessa agreed, but we couldn't insult Father's memory. She looked fondly at Kirk. I couldn't leave my brother alone. I had to be there in case anything went wrong. Of course you did. Stephen was confused. So since he was supposed to be asleep, that's what Diamond was supposed to take him? Yes, she nodded. I was going to wait in the car, then pick up Diamond and wait for him to wake up again. But then I heard my brother's voice, and I didn't see you running away. Kirk woke up. He wasn't feeling well. We came home, called the family doctor. It seems we didn't prepare the potion correctly. Stephen thought that personally he would not have been forced by any family honor. The memory of his ancestors to sleep in a tomb and drink a potion of unknown herbs according to the recipes of ancient witches. More tea, perhaps? Tessa suggested, and without waiting for an answer, jumped up from the table behind. I was in the kitchen. So you're saying you lost the diamond? Kirk's voice combined skepticism. I would if I believed in oaths, Stephen replied. I really needed the money then, and I really thought I'd make money on the delivery. I sympathize. Kirk grinned. You were left without a diamond and without money. I know it was a lot for someone like you. Janie must have passed the task on to someone just like you. Kirk indignantly clattered the dishes with the kettle. Kirk, Brian Neil Ono, behave himself. Kirk obeyed his sister enough to even throw a Stephen. I'm sorry, but you're partly right. The man grinned mirthfully. I needed that money badly. I thought I could get my mother into a rehab center, he added. Stephen had told almost no one about his past in recent years. It was just generalities, because what was there to tell? It's embarrassing. And that's if we don't talk about his last act, about betraying his own mother and leaving her to her fate. Suddenly Stephen spoke. Words poured out of him in a free flow. But he didn't speak in order to get sympathy. He just needed to share it all. His childhood, his youth, how his mother had left him, and how it had ended. He also told that about 6 months after he left his mother, he began to doubt the rightness of his action and decided that no, you can't leave her like that, even though drinking was, in fact, her choice. Stephen decided to go back, but when he arrived, it turned out that his mother had been moved to the hospital because her health had gotten quite bad. Hospitalized right out of the barracks. One of the homeless people sympathized and called an ambulance. Stephen rushed there and was allowed to enter the room. Since Adriana had no insurance, the hospital naturally provided the bare minimum of services. Doctors said that they managed to save the body, but the mind. In general, drunkenness and life shocks. All this led to the fact that Adriana began to go crazy, and the doctors said that according to the rules should be discharged, and further is not their business. Unfortunately, where will the patient go? Stephen was lucky to get a job on a fishing boat. Prospects were excellent, but that's if he lived alone, forgetting his mother. Now things had changed dramatically. With great difficulty, he managed to find a boarding house for the elderly, where Adriana with her diagnosis was accepted. And it cost a lot. Plus, there was a down payment for several months in advance. Stephen asked the owner of a fishing boat for help, and he agreed to lend the necessary amount. In return, however, Stephen had to work almost without a salary for about a year. He agreed. He paid for his mother, and then, when he started traveling around the country, he continued to do so. It was hard, but he kept going. The only thing he didn't have the strength for was to visit her. He had never seen her once in all those years. He still couldn't forgive her for ruining his new life through hers. She had ruined it for him too. And he was also afraid of her just reproaches. Though the doctors at that boarding house had said that Adriana had little grasp of reality. But lately the thing was that recently he had been contacted by the boarding house and told that his mother's condition was rapidly deteriorating. The doctors said to prepare for the worst, and Stephen sort of looked at himself from the outside. What kind of man is he? Is it even after so many years, and now that his mother has become quite old and helpless, he cannot let go of offenses, even if just. He could not find the strength to come closer to her, to brighten her last time with his presence, as a good son should do. Conscience was cutting, gnawing. When else would it make itself known through the years? A dull ache in once broken bones. Except Stephen couldn't cross that threshold. He couldn't not only not forgive, but agree that his mother was important in his life, not existing on its margins as an unfortunate duty, which he had to fulfill only for moral reasons. And when Stephen's story was over, when he had poured out his soul in front of these two, in fact, strangers, who had only once appeared in his life as participants in the unfortunate episode, he suddenly felt better. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Kirk sat with his arms folded across his chest, looking past Stephen to the sea outside the window. Tessa shouldered his thin fingers and looked directly at Stephen as if she intended to peer into the deepest corners of his soul. What happened to you can't be compared to anything, Tessa said quietly. Every person's experience is unique. But she hesitated because she obviously hurried to unite her feelings with her brother, whose opinion about the story Stephen did not yet know. I can understand, she continued. How does it feel to lose everything? We lost the family business, the competitors. They came in and took everything away. We went out of business and pretty much lost everything. We had to sell the family home. We couldn't keep it anymore. It turned out my father had a business loan, and the insurance was written in such a way that the insurance company refused to pay anything. We sold almost everything, Kirk added. There's a little left, but it's crumbs compared to what it used to be. All the proceeds went into building this house. First, they made the foundation. Then Tessa went to school to make it just the way she wanted it. Tessa had always wanted to live by the sea. What so many generations of our family had treasured was taken from us. But perhaps, he grinned thoughtfully, it's for the best in a way. At least now, I have a chance to do what I wanted to do. Otherwise, I'd have been sitting in the big boss's office all my life. I think Tissot kicked him under the desk with his foot, because Kirk jerked and walked in, quietly sending his sister an angry look. Well, sometimes, of course. The saying goes that it wouldn't have been lucky if misfortune had helped. Stephen said, "Only the price for change is high, isn't it?" And as for me, well, I don't think my life can basically go back to normal. It just doesn't seem to be by fate. Stephen's a little miffed by that comparison. Come to think of it, they had lost everything, but had enough money to still build such a house by the sea in a resort town on the background of the fact that he was actually on the street. It certainly hurt. Plus the thought slipped in that if he hadn't gone to the crypt then, you would have taken the stone. He would have gotten the money, returned quietly by a different route, and not been captured by the police. He wouldn't have gone to jail. He could have put his mother in rehab. And the curse. His whole life could have gone right. Maybe if things hadn't gone so wrong back then. But it wasn't really Kirk's fault. It was Stephen himself who screwed it up. All right, I'll go now. Stephen rose from the table. Thanks for the tea. He smiled at Taxi. The girl got up to the sink with the dishes. Kirk rose to follow, clearly intending to walk her to the front door. I've been meaning to ask you something, Stephen said already on the doorstep with repairs. Anyway, do you mind if I keep doing things around here? Why not? Kirk shrugged. As long as you're doing your professional duties, you're welcome to come. The words were said politely and to the point, but as if with an undertone. Stephen inwardly tensed that Kirk noticed the glances he was throwing at his sister. So they were just glances. It's clear as day that Stacy can be absolutely nothing. The next day was quite ordinary. The house was bustling with work, though she didn't show up at all. She usually stopped by every other day to see how the construction and finishing projects were going. This day everything was falling apart, but Stephen held his ground and didn't even swear when one of the workers, a young boy who was still a green trainee, accidentally dropped it on his foot. Returning home in the evening, Stephen habitually pressed the button on the phone to listen to the answering machine message. Usually there was nothing there, but now he heard an unfamiliar voice. He never hung his jacket on the coat rack. Stephen listened to him. The guy who introduced himself as Jeffrey said that they needed to meet urgently and talk. The matter is urgent. It concerns the boarding house where Stephen's mother lies. I'll be expecting you at the Gull tomorrow from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock. Believe me, it's urgent. Stephen could not even guess who it was or what it wanted. But it seems that the mysterious Jeffrey did not belong to the staff of the boarding house. Work on the house involving Stephen's team. The next day were scheduled from 9 o'clock, so it was literally possible to get an hour off. The Seagull establishment was opened back in the 30s of the last century and served as a true gem of a marina, from which almost all 4 seasons opened pleasure boats running along the coast. Stepping inside, Stephen noticed it at once. A young fellow sitting at the farthest table, near which stands a lemon tree in a tub. On his head cap pretends to read a newspaper. Good afternoon. Stephen sits down on the seat opposite Jeffrey. Yes, he asked, and after a nod continued. I recognized him right away. It's just that those who are wearing caps now are walking around, and you are like hiding from someone. So what is it? What did you want? The waitress came over, and they both ordered a cup of coffee, so as not to sit empty-handed. Jeffrey was visibly nervous, but at the same time he gave the impression of an educated and serious young man. It turned out that a year ago his family decided to put his grandfather in the boarding house. Unfortunately, the old man was diagnosed with dementia, and he also constantly dreamed that he was being hunted by some secret agents. At first it turned out that everything was normal, and when Harry visited, he smiled, saying that everything was great, and the boarding house seemed just a resort. But then something alerted Jeffrey to this. Something was that Harry suddenly changed his delusional fantasies. Now he was saying that he and the other boarding house residents were being abused, and only on visiting days they changed him into clean clothes and told him not to complain to his relatives. And it was very strange, because the psychiatrist who had previously seen Harry said that his disease of the mind is characterized by a fixation on what has absolutely nothing to do with the surrounding reality. Grandfather said there was proof of that. Jeffrey continued with a sigh. He said that if you went to the first floor, you could go down to the basement, where they had made a punishment cell for the naughty ones. I decided to check it out. And when I left, I pretended I'd forgotten something in Grandpa's room and walked on unnoticed. I found the stairs to the basement. The door was unlocked, and there was a light on downstairs. There was indeed a room and a door with a window. I looked in and saw 2 orderlies tying up an old lady. It wasn't the kind of room where, they can lock up a violent patient for a while. It was just a hole with a cement floor walls. It was cold, damp. This poor woman was sitting on the floor in her nightgown. Her hands were shackled, seen shackled in museums. Could it be the same thing? I managed to make a short video. I managed to get up and pretend it never happened. I went to my lawyer, and he believed me. I was lucky. He said another man had approached him with the same complaints. His relative had given up a lot. His health got worse in that boarding house, and the lawyer said it was serious. The owner of the boarding house is a powerful, respected member of the community. The police would need a good reason, apart from the complaints of the old people and the videotape, which they would check if it was taken from a horror movie or a fake. And so I decided to contact other people whose relatives are in that boarding house and see if they noticed anything strange in the behavior or condition of their relatives. Maybe if we teamed up, we could make it work. Stephen listened to Jeffrey without interrupting, and he believed him from the first word, because his gut told him the guy wasn't lying. But there was something else that was dark, something that was bothering me. This woman you saw, Stephen asked in a hushed voice. What did she look like? Seemed very petite, Jeffrey said. Gray hair, cut short. It was dark in there, but I'd better show you. He hurriedly pulled out a smartphone and handed it to Stephen. That's my mother, Stephen said, barely seeing the video. But it took his breath away. I haven't seen her in a very long time. I've only been told she's doing well. That's my mother. I'm going to get her. He raised his voice so high and jumped up so sharply, almost knocking over a table, that other visitors to the Gull encroached on them. It's not that simple. Jeffrey shook his head. Did you read the contract to discharge the patient? His condition is mental and physical. A special committee must first determine. This is to protect the boarding house from possible claims. Suddenly, one of the old people will become ill due to the negligence of relatives, when they have already taken the guest, and so there will be evidence that the deterioration is not the boarding house's fault. So it'll take about a week. Are you already taking the grandfather? Stephen asked. Yes, Jeffrey nodded. I've applied. I don't care. Stephen exhaled. I'm not going to wait for her to be bullied any longer. I'm going right now. Only it was much easier to say than to do. The bus to get to the village, near which the boarding house was located, left only late at night, and there was no money for a cab because Stephen had not been spending his budget very carefully lately. The advance wasn't due until the day after tomorrow. On top of that, the phone was ringing off the hook. The foreman demanded that Stephen report to the site immediately or he would be fired. I had to comply. And besides, Stephen decided he'd try to get some cab fare from Matt or Murdoch, for instance. But when he got to the house, neither was there. The first had taken time off work because a child had fallen down the slide and had been taken to hospital with a suspected fracture. And the second went to scandalize the supplier of coffee tiles for the fact that, despite 100 clarifications, sent the wrong shade. So we'll have to wait. Everything okay? Asked Kirk, who was in the house that day to sign a couple of papers to accept the delivery of the next final stage of work. Yes, nodded Stephen. Yesterday's state of mind, when he was pouring his soul out, was far behind him. But it wasn't completely silent either. You're not wearing a face, Kirk snorted. Is it something with your mother? Yes, Stephen blurted out. I have to leave immediately. And he outlined the current situation in a few sentences. You're talking. The lawyer's name is Archibald Stone. I know the guy. He and I go sailing sometimes. We've known each other since high school, Kirk said. He said he's working on a case right now involving some big shot. I sympathize with you, but how are you going to pull this off? Do you want to just barge in and take her? Why not? Stephen's fists were itching, as they say, and his thoughts were racing frantically. I'm afraid those words were not easy to say, but they had to be said. I'm afraid I won't make it, Mom, if anything happens to her. I'm sorry. I must be distracting myself from the really important things, Stephen said with a bitter chuckle, because Kirk was suddenly distracted by his cell phone, apparently texting someone. So I guess this is what we'll do, he muttered. We leave in half an hour. What? Stephen rounded up, eyes at a loss. Are you going with me? I think Dennis alone. Can you manage? He smiled at Sill's eyes. And I brought someone with me. So I think there's going to be a problem. Yeah, that's probably it, sighed Stephen. Not us, them. Kirk patted him on the shoulder. And it came out so unexpectedly reassuring and friendly, almost brotherly, that Stephen's heart warmed. Stephen had thought the foreman would grumble, perhaps threaten to quit. But when Kirk had said a word or two, he let him go easily. I told him that I was paying for the construction, so I had the right to take you away for a while if I really needed to, on personal business. And I said that if he didn't have time to do something because of that, I wouldn't make any claims, and I'd pay for an extra day for the crew to finish everything. Cleared Zelina's situation. The eye cut out onto the suburban highway. The car was driving at the maximum allowable speed, and taking into account that the highway was busy, Stephen was forced to admit. Great driver. Almost all the way past in silence, and when they arrived, at the gate of the boarding house territory, they were met by another car, from which came out some very formidable-looking shaven-headed type in a black leather jacket. Who is it? Stephen asked bluntly, because he didn't quite know what was going on. An acquaintance, carelessly clarified Kirk, clearly not wanting to go into detail. Let's say, although the firm is gone, but there are still some old connections. He was silent for a while, and while they were waiting for the guard to come out of the gate, he continued. In general, if we tried hard, we could keep the firm 10% to success. Theoretically there was, but Tessa wasn't ready to shoulder the load. And it's not that I chickened out, but my father always said if you're not sure about something, you shouldn't do it. We saved what we could. And I think we're on the right track now. The guard who came out said glumly that today was not a day for visiting guests, which means they need one. We need to see the director of the whole place, about his skinny-headed type. Look, you're not a security guard. I was about to object, but the skinheads did. Leaned over to him, whispered something in his ear, and the guard's face stretched. His face turned pale. Why didn't you say so in the first place? Almost. He shouted in a frightened voice and opened the gate, clearing the way. What did he say to him? Stephen inquired. He hinted that if we weren't allowed in, Mr. Jonathan Green would be very unhappy. That say, many people believe that he has something to do with our Irish mafia and that his name is on the rumor. And that it's true. Stephen was not at all smiling at having anything to do with the mafia. That's not exactly what people say, Kirk grinned. But Jonathan Gray was once my father's golf club partner. He nodded at the leather-jacketed man. His stepson Peter, who we shared a sandbox with. Nice to meet you. A pleasure. Peter asked menacingly without looking at Stephen. But if you have such acquaintances, why didn't you defend your father's inheritance? Stephen still could not see the logic in the actions of his brother and sister. I've already explained, Kirk answered sighingly but patiently. Father himself would have done the same thing if one day he could no longer manage the business properly. We would have brought the firm down and ruined all the reputation our family had built up. This way we kept the family honor and a few % of the stock. The cars stopped in the parking lot of the boarding house, and now there was no time to talk. Stephen could barely keep from breaking into a run. The guard, glancing at the small company, subserviently escorted them to the director's office, And now Stephen realistically barely restrained himself from just punching her with his fist, or preferably two. On the cold round face of the director with the connivance, or maybe with the instructions of which defenseless old people were treated so disgustingly. Unlike the guard, the headmaster was not so accommodating, and even the mention of the powerful Mr. Gray did not seem to affect him at first. However, he was still nervous, twirling the pen in his fingers. His eyes were racing. I swear, no one has ever complained about our establishment before. Finally, in desperation, he declared, "We treat all old people as our own kin. And besides, pardon me, but the headmaster gave Kirk a hard look. Do we have any of your relatives, sir?" "No, fortunately not," Kirk grinned wickedly. "I wouldn't trust you with an old rat, sir. And as for complaints, personally, since I have had no dealings with you, I will make no complaint." But when his palms hit the countertops, he jerked forward, nearly smashing his forehead into Nolito. The nervous beauty of the headmaster's face. But it would be sad if I witnessed my friend being denied his legal right to take his own mother. Wouldn't it? There's more to it than just the rules in your contract, right? And legally, you have no right to keep her. Isn't that right? I see you're well aware of that. The director's tone was more accommodating and almost visionary. Of course, I have now arranged for the mother of this esteemed Mr. Stephen to be helped to pack. "Don't bother," snorted Kirk. "You will escort him to her now." The headmaster reached again to loosen the knot of his tie with half a finger and nodded. "One more thing," Stephen added boldly, and following Kirkorov's example, moved toward the director. "Do you have another old man?" Stephen's heart was allowed in this okay, which stopped. He walked down the corridor and pondered what to say to her. First of all, to apologize, to promise that he would not leave her again. But now they were in front of the ward. A nurse in a strict gray dress, who looked terribly displeased and but had to obey, opened the lock of the door, and it fell away. Adriana sat on the narrow bed and looked out the window. Or rather, at the window, because it was closed with the blinds down. How had she aged? Stephen thought. "Is it really her, Mother?" Quietly, he called out. Adriana slowly turned her head. At first he thought it was too late, but the expression on her face had changed. And the main thing was not even the smile on her pale lips, but the way her eyes lit up in a flash. Stephen on the verge of hearing. She dropped the word "son." "I'm awake." "No, Mom." Stephen, unashamed of the tears in his eyes, stepped toward her. A moment later, he knelt down in front of the bed. He plunged into the warm embrace of his mother's arms, just as he had done long ago, when he was a child. "Mom, I'm back. I brought you back." Kirk and Peter froze on the doorstep, and then tactfully stepped out behind him and covered the door, so as not to interfere with the intimacy of two people finally dooming each other. However, it was still almost 2 o'clock before they could all leave the boarding house. The reason for the delay was Harry, who at first got scared, thinking that he had done something wrong and would be taken to the SAU for it. Then he said that secret agents from London were waiting to capture him and bring him to the tower to be tried by the Virgin Queen. The old man was so stubborn that Stephen finally decided on a highly atypical act. He said he had personally witnessed Harry's grandson deal coolly with a couple of such agents, and then took a written promise from them that they would leave Harry alone. And the scroll was secured with the Queen's ring. On a wave of creative imagination, finished Stephen. True raised bones and eyebrows that resembled Harry's snow-white caterpillars. And what was depicted on the seal? "May I ask, Lilia?" assumed Stephen, belatedly remembering that it was a symbol of sorts from the French monarchy. "Aha!" Harry grinned and clapped his hands together. "I knew Louis had something to do with this. Well, in that case, I'm calm. So what are we standing here for? Come on, let's go." And then, when they were already down on the porch, Harry turned toward the boarding house, picked up a pebble from the ground, and swung it at his neck. Sent it flying all the way to the window of the headmaster's office. "Cool," sincerely admired Stephen. "Let's go quickly," he hurried everyone. "But how did you do it?" "Geoffrey, whom Stephen had telephoned to say that Harry would be waiting for him at the Gull, was shocked when he heard what had happened. "I'm not." Stephen shrugged his shoulders. "Was that it?" "Him." He nodded at Kirk, who was clearly uncomfortable with being grabbed. And now he rolled his eyes and muttered that please stop talking about it, since the case was already done. "I was at the lawyer's office," Jeffrey told me excitedly. "He said the paperwork was finally ready. The last time I talked to him was a week ago, and he really seems to know how to work. So we're going home now." "What about the family?" Stephen asked. "Won't they want to send Harry to the orphanage again? Or will you look for a good place this time?" "I actually thought it would be best for him," sighed Jeffrey. "I think I'll take a vacation from work for a while. I'm a photographer for a magazine, and basically they can do without me for a bit. There's someone to replace me. I think I can look after Grandpa for a while, and then I'll think about it. But I certainly don't trust him to anyone else." The hero of the discussion was sitting there, and the varnish was chocolate for the money. The whole company occupied a large table, so there was enough room for everyone. Adriana just sat and looked through the window at the sea, over which seagulls were flying. It had been a long day. Stephen himself had to make up his mind. After all, he lived in a tiny apartment and could not imagine how he would be able to combine work and taking care of his mother, who still had a little bit, but had problems with consciousness. But once again, Kirk surprised him by saying that it was possible to hire a good nurse for Stephen's mother, or even better to work in shifts. And for comfortable living, of course, it would be better to move into a 2-room apartment. And then, of course, Adriana should be examined as soon as possible and as fully as possible to determine the necessary treatment for her. Unfortunately, Kirk noted, there was a strong possibility that she would still need constant medication and medical supervision. "Thanks for the advice," Stephen sighed. "But I don't think I can afford all that. I'll keep it simple, brief, and even a little strict," Kirk said. "No objections," he added. An emotion of shock and amazement came over Stephen's face. "I can help with that," Jeffrey said. "You got my grandfather out of there. I owe you a debt of gratitude." Stephen was confused. "What do you mean, essentially strangers?" "Yeah, they were both very wealthy, but it's still an offer of help. I don't know what to say." He expressed his feelings honestly. "I just did." "Thank you." "I will." "There's no need to say anything," Kirk said. "Better just do it, and do it soon," he added, nodding at Harry, who was flirtatiously informing a passing young waitress that he could show her around the world because he had secret agents as friends. The next few days, or rather weeks, passed in incredible bustle. They seemed to stretch on like an eternity, and yet they flew by so quickly. Stephen's mother and he were settled in an apartment downtown, with attentive professional caregivers to help manage everything. Kirk helped Stephen negotiate an emergency vacation at work. Jeffrey kept him in the loop. The director of the boarding house and his assistants had finally been charged appropriately, and all the elderly wards had finally been taken care of. The renovation of the house, by the way, was finally completed, and one day Tessa said that she wanted to meet Stephen, that they needed to talk. At first it was about how nice the house was, and how glad Tessa was that Stephen was doing so well with his mother. And then somehow Stephen asked Tessa out on a date. She froze, frozen, with only her long pearl earrings swaying. "And here I thought you'd never go for it." Suddenly she laughed. "And I'll have to do it all myself." "You mean ask you out on dates? That wouldn't be so romantic." He was amazed that she'd been looking at him for a long time, and now he could breathe a sigh of relief that the date had gone well. And then, yes, Stephen still mentally returned to his doubts that he was not a match for Odessa, and even thought with trepidation about how soon the relationship would undoubtedly have to be severed. "We should talk," Kirk said. Stephen was at his and Tessa's house at the time. She had recommended him as a good repairman to several of her friends and had called him over to discuss details of future work and to give him a couple of tips on future clients. These friends, as Stephen realized, were very rich people and he thus had the opportunity to build up a large client base so that he could leave the firm and work as a private master. Or maybe you could start your own company one day, Tessa told him. And it was clear she wasn't kidding. Good, agreed Stephen with a pick. The men stood on the veranda, the sun slanting over the horizon. Seagulls flew over the water. I didn't tell you this, Kirk said with a sigh. But my sister hopes you'll propose to her soon. Yeah, Stephen gasped with excitement. He had thought about it, but it seemed like an unrealistic dream. I've thought about it, he admitted. Good, Kirk nodded. Because I'm not going to let anyone play with my namesake. I don't know what she sees in you, but I respect her choice. Kirk's hand came down on Stephen's shoulder. The fingers squeezed made her happy. I believe in you. I'm giving you a chance. But remember, if you see my sister, I'll send you to the other world with my own hands. Stephen smiled. He had no doubt that he loved his namesake and that he would do anything to make her happy.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Kathy was born and raised in a rural family. Her mother worked on the farm all her life. Her father worked as a driver. Kathy and her sister Christina rustled around the house from a small age, cleaning, cooking, tending to the livestock. Parents didn't have time. They earned money. They came home tired in the evening, and their daughters looked after them. They would set the table, pour tea, and carry clean towels after washing. It was the order of the day then. Kathy dreamed of being a teacher from childhood. Perhaps her first teacher played a big part in that. It was a beautiful, very intelligent young girl, barely graduated from the institute. She spoke competently and calmly, knew the answers to all questions, and skillfully motivated the class to successful study. She had no laggards. Even the weakest tried and stretched to please Mrs. Anna. Kathy remembered crying when her favorite teacher's practice was over and she went home. She hadn't been the only one upset. Since then, the girl had firmly decided that when she grew up, she would become a teacher, as good and kind as Ms. Anna. So Kathy never changed her mind. She studied well and, having finished school, easily entered the university. Life in the city began to get strange. That Metals, a room in the dormitory. It was so unusual. The girl had never been separated from her parents and sister Christina for longer than a couple of days. And here it was all of a sudden. It was scary and hard at first, but Kathy quickly got used to it. She liked her studies, her classmates, her teachers. The girl realized more and more clearly. She had chosen the right path. Being a teacher is really her calling. After receiving her diploma, Kathy got the first job in her life. She was taken in the local city school, also in the prestigious language gymnasium. And the salary offered such a young girl could not dream of. Kathy plunged headlong into her work. She liked everything and to teach, and answer the numerous questions of her kids, and write notes for lessons, and deal with interesting and difficult cases for the pedagogical council. A young specialist was noticed and appreciated. It was nice to receive compliments from experienced colleagues. Kathy felt really happy. Christina, her sister, had also moved to the city by then. Graduated from the College of Economics. She got a job at a meat packing plant in the administrative office. Even got married, and very happily. James, the son of the director of the plant, fell in love with the pretty young employee. He was from a wealthy family, handsome, educated, witty. Perhaps his parents were at first against the bride's misbehavior from the village. But after recognizing her, they grew to love and accept her. Of course they did. Beautiful, hardworking, faithful, kind. The young lived in their own apartment, which had 3 spacious rooms and a huge loggia. This miracle was given to them at the wedding by James's parents. Kathy was sincerely happy for her sister. But her personal life was not going well. Back in her university days, Kathy had several failed romances. They all followed the same pattern. First, the girl became enchanted with the next suitor. She began to see him as an ideal man. Prepares in her mind for marriage. Then came the epiphany. Wearing heartache and almost disgust to the one who recently was the meaning of life, Kathy. For some reason, her beau turned out to be infantile and spoiled creatures and egoists, not independent weak. No, with such Kathy could not connect her life. Bitterness, disappointment after each breakup remained for a long time. That's why Kathy decided to take a break. Well, these men, they're just frustrating. It's better to get down to work on her career. And then, one day in the life of a young teacher appeared he, Andrew, a modest, even a little stiff and short guy with blue eyes and a nice smile. For the first time, they sought each other in the school gym. On the eve of September 1, Andrew was leading a team of craftsmen who were hurriedly finishing the school renovation. The young men met their eyes. Kathy immediately realized that this man hooked her something. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. He was not so handsome, quiet, and unremarkable. And he flared to the roots of his hair at the sight of Kathy and turned away, embarrassed. It looked very sweet and touching. Kathy realized that he liked him too, at first sight. Then Kathy met Andrew every day, and he invariably hid his eyes from her. But the girl began to notice that the guy secretly looks at her when he thinks that she does not see it. And it was very pleasant and exciting. And one day, Andrew suddenly gathered courage. It was already on the eve of the handover. One last chance to get to know each other. Job done. Andrew has nothing more to do at the school, so he'd never see Kathy again. So the boy decided to take a desperate and difficult step. Andrew spoke quietly and just no florid phrases, but his speech was so sincere, so touching. Kathy, of course, melted and agreed to go out with the guy. Andrew did not even realize that she had been waiting for this invitation for a long time and was beginning to worry that she would never get it. And what to do then? She wasn't going to hang herself around his neck. Andrew invited Kathy to the movies. The girl was not worried before the first date. She could see that she really liked Andrew. She felt warmth coming from him and therefore was sure that their meeting would go as it should. If only Andrew would relax a little. He's very shy. After that first date, Kathy realized that Andrew was completely her person. They were so good, so easy together. Both told each other about their lives and destinies. Andrew was raised by his grandmother. His parents died when the boy was only 6 years old. So there he was left with his paternal grandmother, who was already a very old woman. She was an old school lady and believed that children should be brought up in strictness, especially boys. So Andrew's childhood could not be called happy, warm, and carefree. No, the boy didn't complain. He just told me how he grew up and grew up. This is Kathy, sensitive and attentive Kathy. She drew her own conclusions. She felt sorry for this wonderful boy. She wanted to hug him, kiss him, to give him some warmth and care. I mean, that's all he needed. When Andrew was a kid, he went into the army after school. Then he came back, trained as a welder. But he didn't get a job in his profession. But he became a foreman. Repair crews are also bread and butter. Still, the boy never gave up hope of becoming a welder. And the wages are better there. And he'd studied so much for a reason. Andrew lived in a rented apartment, just like Kathy, when he was just a kid. Clever relatives had sold the parents' house, the boy's orphanage. There was no end in sight, so the boy had to start from scratch. But he was not discouraged and did not complain about life, although fate treated him rather unfairly. Andrew was very kind and caring, unlike Kathy's previous beau. He always wondered if she was hungry, and on chilly evenings he threw his jacket over her shoulders to keep her warm with Andrew. The girl felt loved and desired. He seemed to be willing to do anything for her. It was a wonderful feeling. Kathy realized that she had fallen in love, and the feeling was completely mutual. There wasn't even any doubt. Andrew looked at her with such eyes and tried so hard to do everything to make her feel good around him. It was impossible not to notice. Kathy was not surprised when Andrew proposed to her. And of course, she had happily accepted right away. She had wanted to live next to Andrew for a long time. In one apartment, they would take care of each other, support each other, and it would be more fun together. Kathy was tired of returning to an empty, cold room. Christina was not at first delighted with her sister's choice. "You're young, you're pretty, you could easily find someone more wealthy." How many friends does my earring have? They're all handsome and sons of wealthy parents, and they're like cheese in butter. What about this Andrew? Nikolai is not yard, not work normal. But when she recognized Andrew, the best Christina changed her mind. You have a good one. Smiled her sister, shared her impressions with Kathy. Very kind and loves you very much. You'll do well together. You'll achieve everything. You can't miss out on a man like that. I'm so happy for you. Andrew and Kathy got married. They lived in his rented apartment and Kathy's golden years began. The young husband tried to help his wife with everything. He did a lot of things for her, and even as he had dreamed, he found a new job. He got a job as a welder at a construction site, took part-time jobs, did not refuse the opportunity to poke around, as he was going to get his own apartment. Andrew dreamed of buying a 3-room apartment in a prestigious neighborhood where there are a lot of good schools and playgrounds, so that his and Kathy's future children had a happy childhood. Andrew often made surprises to his young wife. He would give her a ring for no reason, or just come home with a bouquet. Kathy felt the happiest in the world and thanked fate for sending her such a loving and caring husband. The young couple talked for hours and discussed movies and life stories, friends and relatives. They made plans. Sometimes they argued. Not without that, but they always came to a compromise in the end. They liked the same movies and books. They both discovered new and interesting things about each other. For example, with Andrew, Kathy got into hiking in the woods. Andrew, thanks to his young wife, loved the theater. Kathy was sure that she and Andrew were soul mates, halves of one whole. Even though the couple lived poorly, they had enough to live on. But both excesses like a luxury car or annual trips to the sea. There was no speech yet, but both were happy with what they had each other and often discussed that chance meeting at school, which might not have been. Take Kathy, a vacation in August, as her superiors had suggested to her. And then Alex was born. How did the young couple rejoice at his arrival? The new father was glowing with pride, taking his son Andrew in his arms for the first time. He turned out to be a wonderful parent, attentive, sensitive, caring. He could spend hours after work driving around with the stroller to give his young wife a break. But Kathy most often went for a walk with her husband. It was so pleasant to walk together with Andrew, holding the handle of the stroller and in a low voice, so as not to wake up his son, to talk to the man you love about everything in the world. The young parents liked to make plans for the future of their apartment. They still didn't have one. But the amount in the bank account was slowly but surely growing. Just a little bit more, and the couple will be able to afford to buy their own home from Christina's sister Kathy. At the same time, their daughter Helen was born. Young moms often went to visit each other and together learned the wisdom of caring for babies. The sisters shared advice, discussed the successes and failures of their babies. Kathy felt truly happy, and her husband is so loving and understanding. And her sister is close by. The young couple often dreamed about how their son would grow up. Surely he will be smart, kind, brave, will become, perhaps, a scientist or a master of all hands. And they and parents will try to ensure that the innate talents of their child to open and gain strength. It is only necessary to be attentive and patient. Andrew planned to study a lot with his son, to support him and always be there for him in a difficult moment. Kathy was glad that it was easy and calm at heart. The two of them and cope, raise a child a good man. But the dreams of the couple were not destined to come true. A few years after the birth of their son, misfortunes one after another fell on their small family. First came the financial crisis, as a result of which the couple's savings depreciated. They were only a few days away from buying their own apartment. The goal was so close. But after what had happened, the money accumulated in their account could only buy a couple of winter jackets. And that's if you're very lucky. Alex was already in daycare. Kathy was out of maternity leave. The couple took it hard. They even cried. I don't know what to say. Andrew couldn't help but cry. He thought his wife couldn't see, but she saw everything. The man even looked for an apartment he'd been dreaming of for a long time. Spacious, 3-room, not far from a large school and the Palace of Sports, where Alex could do swimming. And then such a blow. But there was no time to indulge in despondency for a long time. Hard times came. Salaries at Kathy's school began to be delayed for months. Things weren't going too well on the building site either. Andrew's main income now came from coven members. The man spent days working part-time jobs to feed his family. Time passed. Alex was growing up. It was time for him to go to first grade. The family seemed to adapt to the new conditions. Andrew was allowed to stay afloat. The man again made plans for his own apartment. There were hopes for a better life. A happy future loomed ahead. And then tragedy struck at the construction site. Andrew was working unofficially. The owners of the facilities saved money on everything and didn't care much about safety. Andrew knew he was taking a risk, but he was always careful and acted as carefully as possible. But this time, on the construction of a supermarket building, the man fell off from the height of the third floor right onto the concrete blocks piled piles and below. Of course, Andrew did not survive. Arriving in an ambulance, doctors had only to state the man's death. Kathy was not told the terrible news until the morning. For her, the whole world turned upside down in that second. She could not even cry for a long time. The woman felt her soul and heart literally torn in half. She didn't want to live. How and why get up in the morning if there is now no nearest and dearest person? Kathy realized that she would never meet someone like Andrew again. There was no one else like him, and she didn't need anyone else. She missed his smile, his look, the smell of warmth. It was physically painful to not be able to hug a loved one. There were his things around him: clothes, books, glasses. But Andrew himself would never come home again, would never hug her and her son, would never joke with them. How to accept that? To dull the pain, Kathy even took up the bottle. Kathy realized, of course, that this was a road to nowhere. But at that moment, she didn't care, just as long as she could get rid of the unbearable pain for a moment. There's no telling what would have happened to the woman if it hadn't been for Christina. She took Alex in for a while. She saw that his mother was not able not only to look after the child, but could not even cope with herself. Kathy didn't care. She took Alex, and that was fine. And she didn't even think about her own child's feelings at that time. But he was also in pain and scared. Strange as it may seem, Alex's illness brought Kathy back to life. He caught pneumonia and went to the hospital. Christina came to her sister in tears to tell her what had happened. She felt guilty. She hadn't looked after her nephew. He had a high fever and was delirious. The doctor and I thought it was stress at first. After all, the father's dead and the mother's in a state of confusion. But then it became obvious it was more serious than that. He was in intensive care for 24 hours. He seems better now, but the doctor says it's too early to relax. And you're drinking, it's a threshold to get back into life. You can't go back. Now we're going to lose another boy. This situation brought Kathy back to life. She was more scared for her son than she'd ever been in her life. She pulled herself together, stopped drinking. She got her job back. And of course, she became a caring and loving mother again. Every day, Kathy went to visit her son in the hospital. At first, she stood under the windows, and then, when Alex was allowed to go out, she walked with him for hours on the hospital yard. Alex grew up immediately. Trouble had turned a 7-year-old boy into a little old man with sad eyes. He was surprisingly thin, pale, and silent. Looking at her son, Kathy realized that he was under deep stress. Her baby is traumatized. He needs a strong mother. And she, Kathy, took risks to remove, drowned in her own grief, forgetting about the native man, so much in need of her support. Kathy has been the perfect mother ever since. Attentive, totally focused on her son, caring. In the city, Kathy couldn't hold on. It was too expensive to rent an apartment. The woman didn't make that much money. She had to return to the village. Father was already gone, and his life was taken away by a heart attack 2 years earlier. And my elderly mother was in great need of support and care. It was already hard for her to cope with the household on her own. So Kathy's move came very well. Alex went to the first grade of the village school. Kathy got a job there as a teacher, but soon she had to think about changing jobs. The salaries in that school were very different from the salaries. In the city gymnasium on such crumbs was simply could not live, and Kathy had to pull the child alone on his feet to put him on his feet. And then a neighbor, Aunt Nura, offered a good option. Her nephew had a point at the central market in the city. He sold clothes and shoes and accessories. He needed a salesman, someone decent, someone he could trust, a salary. Aunt Tyran, the nephew, promised a good one. He also offered a percentage of the proceeds. 2 by 2, Kathy was also quite satisfactory. It was hard, of course, to part with the dream job. After all, teaching kids is Kathy's true calling. The woman knew from childhood what she wanted to be. But what can you do when times are so hard? They've got to eat something with Alex. What wouldn't you do for a child? With great regret, Kathy left school. She missed her students, her coworkers, and her school life for a long time. Her heart sank every time she saw uniformed children on the street. But Kathy was facing new realities. Working the market was hard. Capricious customers who themselves do not know what they want, scandalous traders. Competitors, heavy financial responsibility. And the road took a lot of time and effort. All the same, in the days when Kathy went to work, she had to get up neither light nor dawn and walk almost 2 kilometers to the nearest stop, through which the bus to the city. But the paycheck was good. Now Kathy could buy her son and beautiful clothes and toys. And even to the sea, they flew to the resort every summer. And her mother helped to look after her son. She was already, of course, very old. But she had enough time and energy for her grandson. Kathy often went to visit Christina. She did not work, was busy with the house and her daughter could afford. Her husband earned enough to provide for the family. Christina often felt sorry for her sister. How did your fate turn out? You work like a horse, spinning as hard as you can. I even feel awkward about being a housewife, and you. Everyone has his own fate, sighs Kathy. I'm not complaining about mine. We all have something for nothing. Kathy was genuinely happy about Christina's life. She adored both her sister and her niece Helen Christina, but her daughter. The 4 of them often went out together. They'd go out together. All in all, they lived close together. It was Christina who advised Kathy to save some money and invested in shares of a large company. James says it's the right thing to do. We have a lot of money invested in those stocks ourselves. My husband's sure it'll be great in the end. And James is smart, he knows. Kathy listened to her sister, and without saying a word to anyone. She bought a few shares. The capital grew, but it was impossible to get rich very slowly thanks to such interest, as it seemed at first. But Kathy decided to let the money lie on deposit. But she did not tell her son or her mother about the shares. I don't think they'll approve. They'll say it's all a waste of money. Let the family live in peace. So Kathy had her own little secret. Now she was saving money, buying stocks, saving for a happy future for her son. Alex grew up a smart, athletic boy, unlike his modest, quiet father. Alex was the soul of the company. He always had a lot of friends, comrades. The guy walked a lot, laughed, socialized. He was a very cheerful and carefree person. Kathy, looking at her son, was happy to see what kind of a guy grew up. Confident, brave, smart. This was exactly the kind of son she and Andrew imagined when they walked around the neighborhood with a stroller. Alex dreamed of becoming a lawyer, but to enter the cherished faculty he lacked just a little. The guy had to go to the army. Returning, he decided to try his luck in the city. His mother supported her son's decision and even helped financially. She rented Alex an apartment. Go, try, dare. Just be careful and know that no matter what happens, you can always come home to this house. Thank you, Alex smiled. But I'm not going back. I'm going to make my way in the city. There are so many opportunities there, so many prospects that something will work out. Goodbye, smiled Kathy. It was scary to let her son go, but what can you do? The boy had grown up. It was time for him to start his own life. Alex enrolled in a construction college and at the same time got a job at a factory. He studied, worked, and paid for his own apartment. He often came to the village to visit his mother and grandmother. He always showed up with gifts and funny stories. Kathy's mother had completely given up. She hardly ever left the house, and sometimes she didn't even recognize her own daughters. One day she had a heart attack. Kathy called an ambulance. Mom was taken to the hospital. The old woman never came back. What do you want age? The doctor sighed tiredly. No one is eternal. Kathy and Christina organized a funeral in the village. A lot of people gathered for the wake. After all, everyone here knew Mom. Then Christina told her sister to take over her parents' house. I don't need that half of the inheritance. I don't need it. You know I don't. What about you? You took care of your mom the last few years. That's hard work. So it's only fair that you get the house. Kathy didn't mind. She really needed her own place. Old age was fast approaching. The woman was sometimes surprised at how quickly her life flew by. It seemed that she and Andrew Alex had just been born. They were young, full of plans and hopes, beautiful. And now Alex is a grown-up, independent man. Andrew is not, and she herself is almost an old woman, that ahead only pension and quiet, peaceful existence in a village house. The only hope is in Alex. Here he will get married. His grandchildren will be born. The kids will come to visit their grandmother. Then the joy in life will appear. By the way, Alex is a good man. He did not give up his dream of law school. He got in after all. It was hard for him to work and study, but he'll get through it. Kathy, if anything, will help and support him. Christina said it was time to live for himself. You're young, you're still beautiful. Alex has grown up. Now you can treat yourself. Your salary is not bad. You even have savings. Let's fly to Italy or Greece. You've never been abroad. We'll take a walk there and have a vacation. What, Greece? What, Italy? Kathy smiled back. I have a grown-up son, Ivan, will soon get married. Probably he will need to help with the wedding and the apartment. That's what I'm saving up for. I don't have time for a vacation. Your son is a healthy, grown-up man. He's so strong and handsome. He'll manage on his own. You have to think about yourself sometimes. But Kathy didn't agree with her sister. She likes to talk easily in front of her husband like that. And Kalenka was born with a golden spoon in her mouth. She has a future for 100 years ahead planned and secured. True, the nephew was good, despite the rich parents, and grew up wise, modest, judicious. Simple, such a natural, pleasant, very independent too. Like Alex, she's been working since she was young. Golden girl. When Kathy had argued with her sister that Alex would need her support for the foreseeable future, she'd been right on the money. Shortly after that conversation, the son came to visit his mother for the weekend. He was mysterious, not as he always was. Kathy immediately realized that something was wrong. The woman quickly set the table and put out her son's favorite treats: fried potatoes with mushrooms, pancakes, and pickles from the cellar, and then watched with pleasure as Alex absorbed it all to satiety. The young man shared with his parents an amazing news: Mom, I'm getting married. As Kathy splashed her hands, went on, the calm questions fell from her like from a cornucopia. The woman is filled with a mass of emotions: joy, of anxiety, surprise. Her name is Julia. You're gonna love her. I'm bringing her here next weekend. You two should get to know each other before we get married. Just wanted to warn you first. Kathy nodded her head with a smile. She knew, of course, that this moment would come sooner or later, but still found herself caught off guard by the news. But wow, Alex is getting married, all grown up. Julia worked as a waitress in a cafe. The guy often came to eat at this place. That's how they met. Julia's from the country too. The son shared details. She was raised by a single mother too. See how much we have in common. Julia came to the city to go to law school. Another amazing coincidence. She dreamed of working for the police, helping to catch criminals, but she's so frail, so thin. What kind of policeman would she be? Julia didn't make it. She failed her college exams, but the girl did not want to return home to the village. What would she do there? She grew up in a small, remote village in a poor family. Her mother had 5 younger children besides her. Julia didn't want to go back to her old life, so she got a job as a waitress in a cafe. She rented a room in a dormitory and lived on her own, working slowly. How long have you two been together? 6 months almost made Alex smile. From that smile, Kathy realized that her son was head over heels in love. She's nice. takes care of me. She cleans the house, she cooks. I mean, we've been living together for 4 months in my rented apartment. I proposed to her the other day. That's how Kathy got through. It's how much to prepare and the dining room for the wedding to order and outfits for the bride and groom to find and host, hire and menu. Think through and the invitation to send out to moms. We decided that we can do without all that. Just answered Alex. We'll sign everything quietly in the registry office and everything as you want, nodded Kathy. She had painted in her head the image of a perfect wedding for her only son a long time ago. It was a cheerful celebration with a crowd of dressed-up guests, a ringing toastmaster, a huge cake, and a table full of treats. Cars decorated with balloons and ribbons, dancing, a beautiful bride and a happy groom. But since the young people decided differently, so be it. It's their holiday after all. The following weekend, Alex arrived at his mother's house with his bride. Kathy was confused, prepared a royal chair, and made salads and meat, spared from the appetizers, stacked on the composed. Kathy was very excited. She wanted to please her future daughter-in-law, to show Julia that she was very much expected in this house. They were preparing for the arrival of the dear guest, as long as not to say the wrong thing, so that Alex was ashamed of her mother. Then it didn't happen. Julia turned out to be a thin girl and not tall. Big dark eyes, thin eyebrows, and a spread of thick silk. She was dressed simply but tastefully, an elegant dress, low-heeled shoes. At first, the guests and the hostess felt a little constrained. Julia, looking around carefully, was silent. Apparently, she was embarrassed to say a word. Only after a while did Kathy realize that this modesty was feigned. Julia was just looking around. She was choosing tactics of behavior, drawing conclusions. The atmosphere at the table was moving. Alex joked, amused his ladies, throwing up interesting topics for conversation. He was always so lively, energetic, companionable. In the course of the conversation, it became clear that Julia was indeed from a very poor and disadvantaged family. The girl charmed Kathy at the first meeting with her modesty. Bride Alex had a very sweet smile, and how she looked at her fiancé. In her eyes shone tenderness and love. The guy, however, answered Julia in the same way. He held her hand, now and then took her by the waist. There was love and harmony between the young people. Kathy looked at them and her heart rejoiced. Alex and Julia were married. Kathy suggested the young people to have a party in a cafe. All right, not a real wedding with a toastmaster and cars. But they could have a proper celebration with their friends. She even set aside money for it. Kathy had savings. Over the years, the woman managed to put aside a certain amount, plus stocks bought on her sister's advice. They'd grown a lot. At first, Kathy dreamed of buying an apartment in the city, but then realized that in the village she lives well. Quiet, calm people, familiar and friendly around. Kathy liked the very atmosphere reigning in her village. Closer to retirement, the woman realized that she did not want to move anywhere, but she could. She had enough money for a small apartment. But never mind, her son could still use it. Only Christina's sister knew about the savings. Kathy didn't talk about her wealth, not even to her son. She wanted Alex to grow up independent, that he as a man, himself tried to earn money for housing and something to achieve in life. But it will not work out. His mother will always help him in a difficult situation. There are means only for the time being. He shouldn't know that. Let him make his own way. The money was in a bank account. Kathy had invested some of it in stocks a few years ago on the advice of her sister's husband, and the money was now generating a good income. For her son's wedding, Kathy had withdrawn from the account. The amount she had estimated would be enough for a lavish celebration. She wanted to give them a present. On her son's next visit, she handed Alex a puffy envelope. Wow, he was amazed. He poked his nose inside. What a surprise. Where'd you get it? I saved up, Kathy smiled. Make yourself a holiday like you want to go out to a restaurant with your friends. Don't deny yourself anything, have fun. Thank you, smiled Alex. But we better save this money for renting an apartment. Why do you need to rent an apartment and already earn money? And the wedding, it is in general once in a lifetime, only happens. Well, ideally, of course. I have problems with my job, Alex admitted. They pay pennies, and it's unstable there. I'm just in danger of getting sick. And Julia, that she does not earn enough. A waitress does not pay millions. It's okay. Kathy patted his grown son on the shoulder. Alex is all grown up. He's a big man himself, and his problems are just as grown up. Already financial issues sadden him. He's thinking about supporting his family. I feel sorry for him, of course. Yes, everyone goes through such things. Don't worry, son. When you finish your studies, you'll find a better job. You're my good boy. You're so smart and handsome. You'll be such an educated man. If you're such a man, they'll take you everywhere. They won't take you. Alex sighed even harder. I was expelled, as Kathy asked. Why for truancy? Alex said quietly. Kathy was almost crying, son. In her dreams, she had already seen her son as a graduated lawyer, successful, competent, highly paid. And now, all of a sudden, it's news like this. Just like that. Alex looked at his mother with irritation. I had to work a lot, so I didn't get to classes. I had a lot of absences. I thought they'd come out. They didn't. So I got expelled. No big deal. Kathy pulled herself together. Alex needs a little encouragement now. You'll learn. Not the first and not the last. Yes, I do not want to finish studying. Alex got angry. I'm a grown man. I'm sitting in the pears, pants rubbing. It's funny. You have to earn money, not suffer with nonsense. Kathy did not argue with her son. Not in that. He was now in a state of nothing. Then she will change his mind. Education is necessary for a young man. Otherwise, you can't build a career. A woman is sure to convey this to her grown-up only child. Now it is necessary to support him, to calm him down, to encourage him. Well, if you don't want a wedding, do with this gift of mine. What do you wish? Nodded Kathy Alex. Thank you. Alex's mom smiled gratefully and happily. We could really use the money right now. We're happy to help. You're all grown up and practical. Others would be happy to spend money on a holiday. But you're thinking about the future? I have to, sighed Alex. The son left, and Kathy stayed home with a heavy heart. Alex was also worried now. He didn't finish his studies. No decent job, no place to live. Now he's getting married. If children will go, Alex will have to work at unskilled work from morning till night to provide for his family. And this is not the future Kathy dreamed of for her only child. He's a grown man, he'll figure it out. Calmed her sister Christina in the evening on the phone. What are you worried about? You've done everything I asked of you. It's up to him now. Maybe give him money for an apartment. I've consulted with anyone. It's easier. The young will at least pay for the rent. Let him pay. The older sister objected. Don't even think of mentioning that money now. They'll sit on their necks and weigh their legs down. But they'll try to climb up. Maybe they'll succeed. You can always give them the apartment. It's not time yet. You are right, Christina, are right completely, of course, grinned my sister. And you come to visit me. Tomorrow come to the movie with you, go to a cafe. Sit. You need to unwind. Again, Christina, you're right, smiled Kathy. What a blessing that she has such a sister. A close person who will always support and cheer up. Alex and Julia got married. The signing took place in the city registry office modestly and quietly. Kathy, Christina with Rudit, and two of Julia's girlfriends attended the ceremony. Then a small group of people modestly celebrated the events in a cafe. We sat only a little. We made a few toasts to the newlyweds, gave the newlyweds presents, and dispersed. Julia had to go on shift. Alex was waiting at work, too. Kathy stretched out disappointedly when she and her sister were alone. The women decided to do a little shopping. Come on, young people don't care now. Christina waved away carelessly. As long as they lived well. Did Alex live well with Julia? Kathy had no idea. The son tried not to talk to his mother about it. It was awkward for her to ask, to pry into the soul of an adult. The young people came to visit occasionally. Julia behaved politely, but coldly and aloofly. Kathy noted that the young couple seemed to have a good relationship. Alex's job was not going well. He changed places and employers, looking for a decent income, but nothing worked out. Alex didn't want to think about going back to university. Kathy several times wanted to tell her son that she had a safety cushion, which she was ready to give him. She wanted to encourage Alex to take that desperation out of his eyes. But the woman delayed. We need to let the young ones try to get back on their feet on their own. It's important. It's not like they're so needy right now. Yes, it's hard. But they're two adults who should be able to cope. But if there's a child, then it's a different matter. Children should live in normal conditions with calm, peaceful parents. Several years passed. The situation in my son's family did not change. He was still looking for a job. Alex, from a cheerful joker of a joker, turned into a frowning man. Kathy thought it was because of money problems. But one day she accidentally witnessed a conversation between her son and Julia. The couple came to visit Kathy Petrovna. Lately, it happened less and less often. The woman went to the kitchen to take out of the oven forbidden with apples goose. And when she returned with a tray in her hands, she managed to witness an ugly scene. "You're just a lowlife." Julia looked at Alex with dislike. "You can't do anything." Married Andrew. He gave her a cool phone for her birthday. And they're going on vacation to the Emery soon. And you can't even find money for a spa for the woman you love. We're about to be evicted from our apartment for non-payment. Alex silently lowered his head. He had nothing to object. Probably the young man felt at this moment really full of nothing. Kathy's heart squeezed with pity for his son. Wow, Julia often humiliates him like this. Once when she was visiting, she couldn't help herself, and the son was too used to hanging his head. He wasn't even surprised and didn't even try to defend himself. Julia's a real piece of work. He's so modest and pretend at first. And herself. Kathy had a hard time pulling herself together. You can't show your true feelings about the situation. In fact, she must pretend she hadn't seen or heard anything. Her interference will only spoil everything. Julia will then have the opportunity to call Alex a little son. But of course, she's going to give her mother-in-law a run for her money. That's for sure. No, let them deal with it themselves. They're adults. For the rest of the evening before the young ones left, Kathy stayed neutral. Talked on distracted topics, smiled at both spouses, and tried not to notice the sunken sadness in her son's eyes. When the children left, many things became obvious to Kathy. Alex is head over heels in love with Julia. That much is clear. He's willing to go to great lengths for her. He tries, he fights, but he can't get anywhere. Largely because Alex never finished his studies, and he didn't finish his studies just because of Julia. The guy has to work hard to provide for his lover's needs. Kathy got herself back. You have to be objective. It was still Alex's choice to drop out of university and get a job. Yes, a lot of it was out of a desire to please Julia. But Alex made the decisive step himself. How and how to help his son now. Kathy thought again about the money in the account. Should she give it to Alex? Let him buy an apartment. Julia would be delighted. She approves. In serious matters, Kathy is used to consulting her sister. Jana called her. "You're crazy," Christina exclaimed after hearing her sister's reasoning. "Under no circumstances do not buy an apartment now. Don't you realize that it will be considered as jointly acquired property in marriage? They've only been together a week. What if they get a divorce? Julia would take half of it without blinking an eye. I understand if they had kids. Then at least the grandkids would get everything. And now it's going to someone else. You worked hard. You didn't earn money for this spinning your tail. Oh, it's hard being the mother of a grown son." Kathy sighed. She realized her sister was right again. So many nuances to keep in your head. It's not easy being a mother at all, her sister parried. But it's nice sometimes. A few more years passed. Kathy saw that her son was unhappily married. Alex was still looking for a decent living. He did all sorts of things, and Vaktang, and already worked, and tried to open a business, and worked as a trucker, but nowhere for a long time. What was going on? The company went bankrupt, or he didn't pass the medical examination. Finally, Alex gave up. Tired. It's hard to work and be disappointed. One day he came to his mother suddenly, unannounced, alone. "We are not pulling the life in the city," he sighed. "It's expensive for us." We'll come back for the first time with you. We'll live. You don't mind? No. Shook her head in surprise. That's good, nodded Alex. In that case, we'll come next week. Kathy was at a loss after her son's departure. Are they going to live together here in the village? What kind of a strange decision? There are no jobs here. What Alex and Julia are counting on. But the woman did not argue with her son. She saw that he's already having a hard time. All right, let them try. They are probably just looking for a way out of a difficult situation. They're also considering a life in the countryside. Well, we can do that, since the city didn't work out. Life together with Alex and Julia began with the division of territory. Mom, we will live in the living room, said Alex. Why? Kathy was surprised. She had prepared for the young corner of her bedroom. In her opinion, it was the most cozy room and remote. The young people would live more quietly there. Living room, Kathy liked to rest here watching TV, and the neighbors often dropped by. There was plenty of room in the living room for friends. Because it was the biggest and brightest room, Alex answered simply. Then Kathy realized that her son was broadcasting Julia's will. He always tried to please his wife in everything. He loved his young wife more than his father's life and took advantage of it. Julia immediately showed her true face to her mother-in-law. Did not even try to pretend anymore, polite or modest. She didn't like everything Kathy did. And her mother-in-law didn't cook right. Too fatty, unhealthy. And the server's table was sluggish, wrong. And she didn't even know how to mop the floors. Julia would often admonish Kathy with a look of contempt. That it's you who rattles the dishes in the morning and disturbs your sleep, or are your friends laughing too loud? Couldn't you get together somewhere else in the evening? At first, Kathy was at a loss for words at her sister-in-law's insolence. Then, of course, she thought of appropriate responses to Julia's barbs. She wanted so much to remind her that she was not in her own house. Accordingly, she should behave more modestly. But Kathy lingered. For her son's sake, of course. The woman saw. Alex is very attached to Julia. He loves her, idolizes her. The young husband tried to fulfill his wife's every whim. There were many whims. The man failed and felt guilty. Julia was suspicious of elegy, this feeling of guilt. Often she mentioned husbands, boyfriends, her acquaintances who overpowered the women they loved with jewelry and literally overwhelmed them with money. Kathy understood the purpose of what was being said. Julia was manipulating Alex, played on his feelings, used her spouse to suppress him. But she wasn't even trying to open up to her son. He's not in the right state of mind right now anyway, too blinded by love and passion. Kathy sincerely did not understand what her son found in this Julia. Well, yes, she was pretty, but there's a lot of them out there, and now you're getting these feelings. It seemed that if Julia asked him to jump off a cliff, he would do it gladly. Alex got a job at the local sawmill. The work was hard, physically exhausting, but the pay was good, enough to take Julia into town from time to time, then to shopping, then to a restaurant. The young wife herself didn't bother to work. Well, where can I find a suitable place here in the village? She sighed. And in the city, every day do not go to the city. I traveled, Kathy suddenly remembered. I had no husband, no child to raise. So I drove from here to the central market every day. Why are you comparing times and situations? Julia sighed languidly. First of all, I am married, fortunately. After all, the responsibility for the material maintenance of the family lies on the man, not on the woman. Secondly, we are in no hurry to have children. I believe that it is silly to give birth to Beskov without a yard is terribly irresponsible. And thirdly, I'm going through such a period now. Do you think it's easy to work as a waitress on night shifts? To tolerate the antics of customers? I need to recuperate, get back to my old self. Kathy could have said a lot of things to her daughter-in-law, but she kept quiet. She kept quiet for her son's sake. He was having a hard enough time as it was. And now he's going to be caught between his mother and his wife, like between two fires. Kathy was well aware that her daughter-in-law was openly condemning her life. And this Julia to give birth to children without a stake, without a yard, is irresponsible. I mean, that's a stone to her head. When did she and Andrew have Alex? The Young family didn't have their own place yet. That's what the daughter-in-law was implying. The longer the Young lived at Kathy's, the clearer the woman realized Julia manipulates Alex, makes him dance to his own tune, uses the spouse. The son is the one who is in love with the young beauty, put on the other in front of his eyes and left the spouse. Turns this situation in his favor. Julia herself clearly does not nourish a colleague any tender feelings. This is evident from her irritation, her dislike of the other look at the spouse. According to gestures, yes, a lot of them, these indicators, and how only the son does not notice. So why is Julia still with Alex? The answer is simple. Who else would work so hard for her? Where else would she find someone so loyal and obedient? Such a feeling as Alex has for Julia is rare, and the girl understands it perfectly well. She will try to make the most of the situation. And if suddenly there will be a more interesting option, she will easily leave Alex. Being confident in her own power, Julia behaved rudely with her mother-in-law right in front of Alex. The daughter-in-law must have realized that Kathy could see right through her. It was infuriatingly annoying and frightening, apparently. And how did Julia look at her mother-in-law? She felt superfluous in her own house, arrogant, full of contempt. Looks, shelves, remarks, reproaches. To have less contact with her daughter-in-law. Kathy now went to visit her neighbor herself. She also often traveled to her sister's house and even stayed overnight. Christina, of course, advised to put the initial Julia in her place. It's your house, after all, shook her sister's head. Remind her of that. Let them think about it now. Tell them you were separating. You were looking for a place to live. Otherwise, she's living on her own, and she's got a lot of nerve. I'll talk to her myself, if you're uncomfortable. No. Kathy waved his hands. No way. Alex is always on her side. It's hard enough for him. He didn't need to add to his frustration. Alex really did blindly believe everything his wife said. Kathy tried to be as polite as possible. I kept silent in response to her nibs, remarks. My sister-in-law uncomplainingly cleaned her plates. Tolerated her reproaches. But Julia, apparently, still complained to her husband about his mother, put in an unsightly light. Mom, why are you picking on her? Sometimes the son would start a conversation. Julia is a wonderful woman. I love her. You mustn't think of her as an enemy. Try to make up with her. I didn't have a fight with her. Kathy tried to justify it. I'm trying not to talk to her at all. Any conversation turns in her direction, and she makes me her number one enemy. That's what it's all about. Alex shook his head sadly. Julia says, so you despise her, or do not notice, or come to reproach. The third is not given. Why do you make her work in the kitchen? Julia was going through a rough patch. She needed a vacation. So I just reminded her to clean up her plate. No one's making her work. I serve you myself. Alex looked at his mother with a sad look, and Kathy realized that everything is useless. He still will not believe that his wonderful Julia systematically turns the life of her husband and mother-in-law into a nightmare. Maybe he'll get to Alex someday, but not now. Julia masterfully turned Alex against his own mother, against the person who sheltered the couple in her house, gave them shelter, who, in fact, feeds them. Since Alex earns pennies at the sawmill, and the lion's share of his salary goes to pay off loans. In the city, the couple had managed to rack up loans that they now had to pay off. It was frustrating and painful. Kathy saw no way out of the situation. She only hoped that Alex would sooner or later see the light. Sometimes she wanted to kick the insolent youth out of the house, but that would mean losing her son forever. Julia manages to turn Alex against his mother on the spot. And here, if she throws them out of the house at a difficult moment. There's a lot of drama to be had here. Shakespeare would be jealous. And this house, to be honest, belonged to Alex when her mother died. Kathy suddenly realized that such things usually happen suddenly. Yes, Mom was sick. She needed help, but there was no sign of her leaving so soon. Kathy thought about it a lot, because she might one day be gone just as suddenly. And then how would Alex be left with? The inheritance was 6 months away. Suddenly some other claimants for this house will show up unexpectedly and heirs. My father had a complicated relationship with his relatives. Anything's possible. To protect Alex, Kathy, who was at that time the only owner of the house, wrote a gift deed to her son, and that was it. Her soul was at peace. Kathy was used to living for her only child. She did everything for him. Now the house officially belonged to Alex. And the son knew it was true. At the time, Alex thought he wouldn't need the inheritance. He planned to settle down in the city, buy a nice apartment, that he's some country house. Who knew it would turn out like this? Kathy decided to be patient. It cost her a lot of strength to keep her temper in check and not take it out on Julia. And it wasn't good for her health either. But for the sake of her son, she could bear it as long as Alex was happy. If not for Christina and her sensible advice, Kathy would have spent all her savings on an apartment in the city for young people. But her sister was right. The woman understood that now more than ever. Julia doesn't like Alex. It's obvious. She's using him. If Alex buys an apartment, which will be considered jointly acquired property, the young spouse will immediately demand a divorce, and she will legally take half of the housing with her into her new life. And this is very good money. Well, no, we'll not wait, Julianka. Alex won't be blinded by this strange love for ages. Someday he'll see the light. That's when he'll need an apartment in the city for his new life. Too bad he can't get out of the house for free. Kathy had to put up with the antics and unfair reproaches of his sister-in-law. There was no end to it, but the woman understood. Now she's in no position to change anything. Christina, seeing that her sister was having a hard time, suggested we go on vacation together. Why don't we dispel all Kathy's phone calls and go sunbathing? We'll swim in the sea. We'll go on excursions. They'll be great. Go for it. In the end, Kathy gave in. She really needed a break from everything that was going on at home. Young people, let them live in the village house. Julia would have to cook and clean. They've spoiled her. Doesn't even help with the plate. She sits at home all day and the phone hangs out and watches soap operas. Julia, of course, expressed her opinion about Kathy's vacation. There is no money in the family, and some people go to resorts. She replied, somehow to Alexa's remark that his salary has been cut again. But here even the man who had angelic patience and in love with his wife could not stand it. Julia, what do you care? Mom earned it. She has the right. What about us? We have never been anywhere with you, and we'll make money. I promise. Kathy hid in her room without saying anything. She didn't have time to get into an argument with her sister-in-law. Things don't pack themselves. It had been a wonderful trip. Kathy and Christina rented a house in a small village by the Black Sea. The sisters walked a lot, swam in the warm waves, sunbathed, went on all sorts of excursions. Kathy once took a risk and realized an old dream, took a ride on a hydrocycle with a young and reckless driver. The spray in the face, the dizzying speed of the endless sea surface. So scary and so much fun. It's never been at the same time. What's their sea and excursions? The sisters even went to discos at night and danced as in their youth. Do not despair. Thank you, Christina, for pulling me out. Sincerely enjoyed, Kathy. I feel like I'm 10 years younger. By the way, that's exactly what it looks like. Christina smiled. You look better, more rested. You look great. And so it was. For the first time in years, Kathy liked herself in the mirror. She had a fresher glow. And most importantly, there was a sparkle in her eyes and life and energy in her face. Kathy felt that she had left behind all the problems and the cranky, demanding daughter-in-law, and the unsettled son, and the endless squabbles in the kitchen. There was a powerful reset. The woman felt strong, beautiful, and energetic. The world seemed bright and welcoming. Only good things were thought of. One day, the sisters came late and admired for a long time unusually large stars and bright yellow moon, which left a clear path on the sea surface. Beauty stretched out Kathy. It certainly was, agreed Christina. It's a shame, only to go back tomorrow. I can't believe it. I love it here so much. Another life, another world. It's back to the same old thing. It's driving them away. Christina couldn't take it anymore. Sitting on your neck and getting hard. She's sad. She'll wait for me. I'll come and clean up your mess. Don't. The admin protested. It will make things worse. There's no need to make things worse, grumbled Christina. There's nowhere else to go. Good evening, lovely ladies. A low, pleasant voice came from behind them. Both women shuddered with surprise and turned around. In front of them stood a man, slim, trim, with elegant gray hair on his temples. He was charming and had a very friendly smile. He was wearing jeans that went up to his knees and a loose black t-shirt. In all this, the stranger looked very stylish and attractive. And hello to you too, answered for the two of them Christina. Wonderful evening, isn't it? The man kept approaching. Kathy could not take her eyes off his smile. It made the stranger's face seem to glow. The man introduced himself as William, said he had just arrived here today, and checked into a room on the second floor of his sister's cafe. Just today, they were having dinner in this place, drinking wine, eating kebab, enjoying live music. William immediately noticed two beautiful single ladies at the table and followed them to the shore. I apologize if I startled you. And don't think I'm a frivolous adventurer. It's just that you both have such kind smiles. I just wanted to get to know you better. I'm here all by myself. I'd like to find some company for socializing. If you don't mind. There's a problem with that. It's Christina's fault, she shrugged. I mean, we're leaving on a plane tomorrow at lunch. That's a shame. The smile slipped off William's face for a moment. Kathy was also sorry they wouldn't have the chance to get to know the man better. Surely it would have been even more fun and exciting for the three of them to spend their vacation together. There was something about William, something special. Kathy wanted to be near him, to look into his eyes, to admire the man's smile, to listen to him. Strange, the woman didn't remember anything like that happening to her in the last 30 years. And had it ever happened in her life at all? Well, if that's the case, we have one night left. William was smiling again. So let's make it a fun night to remember. I come here a lot. I'll show you places to see. You're coming with me. Kathy was ready to say yes right away, but Christina's careful. Christina, unlike her sister, didn't lose her head around the charming stranger. It's like we're seeing you for the first time, she smiled embarrassedly. I don't want to offend you, but it's right to slap yourself on the forehead. William. Of course, there are all sorts of lunatics and criminals nowadays. Of course you're wary, and so am I. Let's just walk along the promenade then. There's a lot of people here. I don't want to part with you. That's the way to humor Christina. Kathy realized her sister was pleased that William was not offended. It was a wonderful walk. The sisters and their new acquaintance chatted and laughed without ceasing. Turns out William lives in New York and has his own business there, a chain of restaurants in the States. He's often there on business, meeting with winemakers, making contracts, shopping. Basically, he's growing the business. The man also told about his personal life, sincerely, without any secrets. He acted as if he had known Christina and Kathy for 100 years. William was widowed early. His daughter was only 9 years old at the time, and he never remarried because his daughter didn't want a stepmother living in the house. And the word of an only child was always law to William. You and Kathy are alike in that, Christina remarked. She too lives only with her son, tolerates a lot for his sake, allows him everything. Yes, William looked at Kathy with interest. The woman's eyes met his, and she flashed like a young woman. She even felt hot. That's a shame. Years later, I realized that's not the way to do it. My daughter grew up to be quite a spoiled brat, but she's doing well now. She found a husband who, like me, tolerates her whims and fancies, and lives quietly abroad, unfortunately. They've gone to a warm place, so I'm all alone. I have a job, friends, but still, after my daughter's departure, I feel empty in the house and in my soul. The trio partied until the wee hours of the morning, and it seemed as if they'd gone back to their youth. William clearly sympathized with Kathy. He tried to please her from time to time, taking her hand casually. Once he hugged her waist lightly and briefly. Kathy wanted that moment to last forever. The sisters reached their cottage only when the matchmaking began. William, of course, volunteered to see them off. I don't want to part with you, William confided. His eyes, of course, were on Kathy. Why do you blame the phones? Christina suddenly suggested. Why did we have such a good time? Why don't we come back again next year? We should call each other so we can have a vacation together. It'd be fun. That's obvious. That's a great idea. William says yes, I'm dictating my number. No, you better give me your phone number. Kathy complied with William's request with a smile. He deliberately held her hand in his as he took her cell phone. There was so much warmth from him, so much tenderness. Kathy wanted to dissolve into it all. It was a shame they had met so late. William quickly dialed his number from Kathy's cell phone. But there he smiled. Now we've exchanged phone numbers. We won't lose everything. Great, nodded Kathy. And she knew perfectly well that this phone exchange meant nothing. And the fairy tale that had almost begun would never really begin, because there was no tomorrow. Already today, she and anyone will fly home. And there again a cramped village house, a disgruntled daughter-in-law, a Willa's son. And the problems hadn't gone anywhere. While she was away. William, today he's been out with them. Tomorrow he'll find someone else. A man like that, he's not for her. He's too handsome, successful, wonderful. Where would she go with someone like that? Sad, of course, but the truth of life. Ah, how he looked at you, smiled Christina, when the sisters were left alone. I wish someone would look at me with admiration someday. Well, just once. Oh, come on. Kathy waved you off with a smile. She knew that now she would often remember William for his soft voice, his delightful manners, his beautiful eyes. And let that man forget about her the very next day. It didn't matter. William, he played a huge role in her life, although he himself did not even realize it. Kathy did not reach her home until the evening. She and Christina had managed to nap for a couple of hours before the flight, but Kathy still felt tired and broken. Sleepless night, flight, acclimatization. The door was unlocked. Alex must have forgotten to lock the gate when he got home from work. He's been tired lately. And then there was Julia, who knows what she was feeding her husband while she was away. It was hard to imagine a daughter-in-law cooking borscht for her husband. The windows in the house were open wide. The steady hum of the television came from inside. The evening news was on. Kathy was about to enter the house with a smile. When she heard Julia's voice, she was obviously in the kitchen. How? Very simple. I was telling off someone who was obviously Alex. Now will appear soon. We will send her for milk. And while she walks, we'll put her things out of the door. It's no big deal. We've agreed 100 times. What are you worried about? Isn't that too harsh? Asked in an uncertain voice Alex. She's my mother after all. And this is her house. Not hers, yours. Julia argued. You showed me the deed of gift. And if that's the case, why should I put up with her here? I mean, she's been harassing me on and on and on. Alex, I told you, she's trying to break us up. But let me leave then, because I can't live in a house with your mother anyway. Okay. Alex mumbled conciliatingly. As agreed, so we will act. You just look, don't give any slack. We do everything right, you know? Standing up for personal boundaries. We're good. Kathy was standing under the window, dead or alive. It slowly dawned on her that she just overheard him talking, and that she was about to be kicked out of the house, and that Alex had agreed to it. There was no way the older woman had expected such a thing. She even had dark flickers in front of her eyes. Her blood pressure must have skyrocketed. Kathy took a few deep breaths to pull herself together, let on a joyful look, and entered the native hay. Oh, hello, lusciously, Julia smiled. And we were waiting for you a little later. A cab was rushing by. I didn't have time to look back, Kathy. I brought you some presents. Oh, what an experience. No sharing. Julia was doing her best to feign some sort of joy at seeing you. Alex stood next to her, slumped and silent. And Kathy perfectly understood the reason for her son's sadness. Of course, it's not easy for him right now. But he can't put his wife in her place. She has too much influence on him. Oh, Kathy splashed Julia's hands. You go to Anna for fresh milk, please. I have soup boiling on the stove. I can't get away. Alex is very tired from work, and I'm sick. If you are not very tired, then of course, nodded Kathy, and left the house, already knowing what awaited her on her return. It was a good thing she had overheard the conversation. She would at least have time to prepare for a serious conversation with her son and his wife. Her suitcases. Kathy spotted the porch from afar. They stood orphaned, leaning against the wall, waiting for their hostess. The hope that Alex would stop his wife's insolent behavior melted like smoke. The woman went up on the porch, knocked on the door. There was a note from inside. Julia's voice sounded. "Read it, and you'll understand everything." "Goodbye. I don't need it." "I need your note," Kathy said. "I want to talk to you. I want to look you in the eye." The door swung open with a bang. Julia stood on the threshold. She looked haughtily at Kathy. "Well, look, if that's what you want." "Julia, why are you doing this to me?" "I've tried to be your friend." "Haven't I? You piss me off. A young woman has split. You're judgmental. Everything's wrong. Everything's wrong. You make your own rules. I don't feel like I own the place. And Alex is fawning over you." "Well, this is my home," gently reminded Kathy. "That's why it's natural for me to make my own rules." Julia exclaimed again. "Again you insinuate that we live in your house." "It's not your house, by the way. It's not yours, it's your son's. So you're the one living here. Then get out of here. You have a good pension, enough to rent." "Thank you." "You even packed my things," Kathy said calmly. And it took a lot of effort to stay calm. Crying. She will when she gets to Christina. Of course, she'll go to her sister's. Who else? Only there aren't many of them here. My stuff is just clothes. What about photo albums? Old books, letters? And this junk is heavy, sighed Christina. "We threw it out." Kathy gasped. It was as if she'd been punched in the solar plexus. It was her family's history, old photographs, letters from Andrew and her parents, postcards, diaries Christina and Kathy had kept when they were young. The first drawings by Helen and Alex. All of it carefully stored in boxes and folders, neatly arranged on shelves on a rack and in the bedroom. Really? Was there nothing left? Julia looked at her mother-in-law with defiance. What is this habit of clinging to junk? The insolent girl grinned. What good are these dusty papers? It's even easier to breathe without them. Kathy, despite her condition, suddenly had a great idea. She even had to suppress a smile so as not to accidentally give herself away to Julia. Soon she would no longer feel like the mistress of the situation. In a couple of minutes, the expression of smugness would evaporate from her pretty face. "So you all threw everything out of my room." "Totally. It's gonna be our closet now. All the boxes, every single one of them." "Did you even look inside?" "Some of it was looked at, some of it was just thrown away." Why is Julia suddenly tense? Were there documents or what? The documents can be recovered in case of emergency. Kathy sank down tiredly on the porch steps. The blue shoebox was thrown away too. "Yeah, probably, but what's the big deal?" Kathy looked up at Julia. "The blue box was my savings for the apartment I was going to give Alex." The words had an incredible effect. Julia stunned pale. She opened and closed her mouth a couple times to say something, then powerlessly sank down on the steps next to Kathy. "Why didn't you warn me?" she almost whispered. Kathy was pleased with the effect of the phrase. She didn't keep the money in any blue shoebox. It was lying quietly in her account. But Julia had to teach her a lesson for all those naughty things, which she did to both her and Alex. "How did I know you'd decide to throw my stuff out of the house?" "I had no idea." The older woman stubbornly played the role of a confused and bewildered old lady. Julia shook her head as if she had woken up from a dream. Her eyes lit up with eagerness for action. "You will tell me everything in detail now. What the box looked like. What shade of blue, was it big or small?" Questions poured out of her sister-in-law like a cornucopia of questions. Kathy answered, trying not to get confused in her statement. The situation was beginning to get her down. Alex had stayed home all this time, never even poked his nose out on the porch. Probably he was ashamed of the fact that he had gone along with his wife and kicked his mother out of the house. But he couldn't go against his wife either. He loved her too much, which Julia took advantage of. After answering all Julia's questions, Kathy walked to the bus stop. "Come on, stay," he mumbled to his sister-in-law. She now needed her mother-in-law to help her in her search. The young woman was determined to find the box, even in a landfill, even at the end of the world. And Kathy could help her find it. She knew what a huge amount of money looked like. Why would she? Kathy was a little surprised. What do you mean? Why should we? Now we have to look for the box of money together. You do care about your savings. Is that what it is? Kathy smiled. That's where you're wrong. I don't care what happens to that money. I was going to give it to you anyway. If you find it, take it. Kathy walked down the street and felt Julia's eyes on her. Her sister-in-law was shocked that she had thrown away so much money with her own hands. Yes, but now she'll be digging her nose into the ground just to bring that wealth home. Greedy Julia doesn't realize that Kathy's money is in a bank account. Her mother-in-law is not so dumb as to keep such funds in a box. Before heading to the bus stop, Kathy stopped by Jenna's neighbor's house. She'd been friends with her mother once, good friends, but now she was gone, unfortunately. Kathy still had a good relationship with Jenna. She needed someone in the village, someone who would tell her what was going on, keep an eye on Julia, and Jenna was the perfect informant. The woman had been outraged at first, listening to Kathy's story. She couldn't get her head around it. How could she do such a thing to a man who had let his daughter-in-law and son into the house when they were in a difficult situation? And then, recognizing it all the way through, Jenna laughed loudly and merrily. But Tamar, you guys, you've got to rub her nose in it like that. You figured it out. I'd like to know how they're doing. Kathy smiled. How are they living? How's the search going? Something tells me this story will open Alex's eyes to his wife. Oh, Alex shook her head, Jenna. I didn't think he'd be so weak-willed. Love is evil, Kathy sighed. Jenna had hit a sore spot in her heart. Of course I'll keep an eye on them. I'll get my Petya on board too. You know how quick he is? Peter. Jenna's son just turned 14. The kid's been using his phone to shoot content for his channel. And Peter seemed to be getting good at it. When Kathy was done with her chores, she went to her sisters. Christina would not leave her, would listen to her, support her, pity her. It was good to have such a person. Since the evening of Kathy's return from the resort, it's been 2 weeks. It's not a long time, really. But in that time, a lot had happened. First of all, Kathy's plan had worked. Julia was hooked. She found out where they take the garbage from their village. She found the dump, and now she went there every day as if to work. The girl was not employed anywhere and had plenty of free time, and Julia's trips to the dump were regularly reported to Kathy by phone by Jenna. She proved to be an excellent contact. Oh, Aunt Kathy. What a circus. She goes to the bus stop first thing in the morning. She's like a tourist. She's got a huge rucksack on her shoulders, overalls, gloves, bags. Everything is serious. And in the evening, she comes back tired, shot, angry. She smells like a motherfucker. Animals scatter. People cringe. It's like a circus. Tales of Julia's adventures don't stop there. Peter, Jenna's son, sometimes followed Julia, rode with the boys on bikes to the dump, and filmed videos of the young woman stubbornly digging through mountains of garbage. Kathy watched these videos on Channel 5M. Julia scrupulously combed through the dump day after day without missing a square meter. It looked comical, of course. But Kathy was already feeling a little sorry for her almost ex-sister-in-law. Alex had filed for divorce. First, Kathy learned from the neighbors that Alex had left home. Then the son called his mother, apologized himself, repented, and at the same time informed her that he was divorcing Julia. She had turned her back after all, and him away with her obsession, money, boorishness, greed. We're getting a divorce, Mom. I can't stand her anymore. She must be crazy. Julia, let her stay at our house for a while. I gave her a week because she has nowhere to go. Julia keeps hoping to find money. It's become an obsession for her. She blames herself for not looking in the boxes I threw out. Eating on her own. She blames me too. It's unbearable. What are you going to do in the city? I finally found a good job with a place to live, which is important. But I'll have to travel a lot. But I don't care. But the money's good. After talking to my son, Kathy felt better. It is so important to be in touch with a loved one. Now between her and Alex, there are no conflicts and misunderstandings. And Alex's life seems to be getting better. He found a job from Julia, who used him openly, and is leaving. Maybe soon he will meet a good girl and will be happy in his personal life again. What are his years? Relationship with Julia will obviously be a good lesson for Alex. He won't fall into such a net again. At least Kathy really hopes so. The nicest thing happened in Kathy's life the day after she arrived at her sister's house. Christina, of course, had taken her in. They had a spare room in their apartment. "Live as long as you like," Sis hugged Kathy. "I'd be happy to move in forever." Kathy went to bed all upset. She still had no idea how she was going to live her life. In the morning, she got a call from William. The same casual acquaintance, so enchanted that the woman at the resort. He said that he couldn't forget their meeting, that he thought of Kathy all the time. Dreams of seeing her again. It was incredible. William. Kathy had never imagined that such a man would actually fall in love with her. But it seems that he did. William called and wrote often. They talked a lot, and gradually they became close, like relatives. Distant, yes. But still Kathy felt that this communication was necessary for both of them. William expressed a desire to come to Kathy, but she suggested another option more pleasant. Kathy would fly to him herself, because the atmosphere of a resort and a lush old country town are, as they say, two big differences. Kathy had the money for the trip that she had saved for her son's apartment. Alex, he earns his own money. Kathy has only one life, and one should enjoy every moment of it. The woman realized this when she retired, but better late than never. In general, Kathy was going on a long journey, went shopping with anyone, bought beautiful things, and felt really happy. True, she had one more thing to do before she left, not very pleasant, but urgent. A conversation with Julia. She'd had enough of being queen of the dump. Let her start a new life too,